Hi, if you want to watch exclusive content with hot girls that you won't watch on YouTube, namely where Naruto roasts Kushina and Mikoto and many other hot girls without restrictions, then visit my Boosty channel at the link in the description.
And the war seemed endless for those who participated, or were involved in it. Several small hidden ninja villages were completely wiped out, including the secret and feared village of Remolino, located on a small chain of islands off the coast of Tierra del Fuego. The village, although small, was well known for its sealing techniques and powerful ninjas. Thus, when they allied with the village of Konoha in the Great War, the great villages of Iwa and Kumo, two of the 5 most powerful villages of the elemental nations, allied to destroy the village with a force of such magnitude without precedence, including the most powerful ninjas of each village, known as the Hidden Shadows or. They gathered almost half of their combined fleets and set sail, while their spies among the Konoha forces made them believe that they would attack the northern front of Tierra del Fuego to snatch any possible support that could be sent to Yuzu. In the face of such a force, even the powerful defensive sealing techniques that the Whirlpool village had established to prevent the docking of any ship on its shores were surpassed. Using powerful land-based ninja techniques, the attackers built an artificial harbor over the deep reefs, where Yuzu had placed his seals to create his defenses. The siege lasted for a week, and the losses of the attacking forces were tales that, when they finally won the battle, and all the members of the village were killed in combat, even the children were killed or sneaked out of the village with his servants and disappeared to the ends of the world. The attackers were only able to fill a tenth of the ships with which they arrived. A year later, the 4 Okage, known as the Yellow Flash for his incredible speed technique, put an end to the war by defeating more than 400 enemy ninjas in a single battle with his signature technique. The enemy villages quickly asked for peace, and the war ended with Konoha as the praised victor, and the Whirlpool sacrifices forgotten by all but a few souls who managed to evade the destruction. This story tells the story of one of those survivors and his quest to restore the glory and legacy of his village back to its former glory. Nobunaga Cage, better known lately by his name from the bingo book, The Shadow of Yuzu, was walking with a firm and slow step through the small village on the outskirts of Inokuni. He hadn't been in the country in almost 5 years, and rightly so. He was still considered a missing ninja of the Whirlpool village, despite its non-existence, and as one of the only survivors of the other famous ninja village of Yuzu, or the Hidden Whirlpool village, as it was comfortably known. His knowledge of Yuzu Jutsu and the sealing techniques were attractive prizes for the minor villages and even the Tin. They would not refuse information the opportunity if he was captured by their ninjas and demanded. Putting these morbid thoughts aside, he headed for the door of the city hall, which served as both a residence and a job for the mayor and his administrative assistants. The room also contained the wanted posters and arrest warrants, which was how he managed lately. Criminals and bandits had no chance, and the pay was decent. Upon entering, he found some Konoha shinobi there, dressed for a mission, and the leader of the 4 asked the village mayor for information. They were all Chunin and relatively young, so he didn't have to worry about being seen. The descriptions in the bingo book were vague and confusing, with only one picture of him from his Genin days, and none of them were old enough to have fought with him 20 years ago. So he passed by them and went to the board, which he examined with reluctance. There seemed to be no new rewards, and I knew that the ones that were in force were obsolete. I had already completed most of them, and had taken them to other villages. His keen ear caught the words of one of the departing Chunin, and left him paralyzed. Like a word I thought would never be mentioned in small talk again. We'd better find those bandits fast. The last thing I want to miss is the Uzumaki hunt, the best thing about the festival on October 10th, watching the demon crush. He was interrupted by a punch to the solar plexus, which sent him to the ground in a daze. Cage was already dealing the next blow, a debilitator to the knee, shattering the bone easily with a chakra-infused blow. The 2 remaining Chunin reacted, surprised by the attack on their own territory, so to speak, by a shinobi. And unknown. The shortest of them was looking in his crib bag, and when Cage gave him a spinning kick with enough force to send him through the open door into the hallway and skidding down the street, flailing helplessly. The latter managed to draw the sword from his waist and attacked Cage, taking a big cut on his side. He flashed an arrogant smile for an instant, only to turn into shock as Cage dissolved into what could only be described as shadows, before a blow to the back of his head knocked him unconscious almost casually at the hands of the real shit that had come out of his own. The one with the injured knee was looking for a crib and another weapon in his bag when, suddenly, Cage appeared in front of him. A terrifying mask of shadows clawing at him and reaching for him, with tiny faces of horror and terror fluttering by. She as if there were souls trapped inside, trying to escape. "Where is the Uzumaki?" The voice was dark and promised an eternity of pain and suffering, but that didn't stop El Chunin from trying to be brave. "To hell with your demon, you're just like the brat. Konoha will take care of both of them," he interrupted himself with a scream as Cage twisted his mangled knee. "Tell me or your friends will die screaming in front of you." As if to prove it, one of the other Chunin moaned in obvious pain, and the man decided it would be better to talk. "The Uzumaki brat is in Konoha, and I told you what you wanted to know, now leave us alone." Cage growled again, tempted to hurt the men even more, just because of what they had discussed before his intervention. The phrase Uzumaki hunt sounded barbaric at best, since the repeated references to demons came. But regardless of the connotations of such words, the fact that a member of the Uzumaki house might be alive was not something he could ignore, and if this hunt was on the 10th of the month, he had less than 2 days to get to Konoha, which in addition, dodging patrols and infiltrating Konoha's precious security systems would not be an easy task. With that in mind, he performed the Shushin Jutsu without hand seals, such was his experience with the Jutsu, and disappeared among turbulent shadows that jumped up from the ground to claim him, leaving Kono's team dejected and a mayor terrified that he was hiding behind his desk in case the mysterious shinobi decided he wanted to come after him. Time jump. 2 days. Location: Konoha. Naruto ran as fast as he could, something he was used to lately. Knowing what day it was, he did his best to return to the orphanage on time, but the matron locked the doors while he was running, claiming that spending the night outside would make him more punctual. The harsh reality was that she didn't like him, like most of the citizens of Konoha, although he wasn't sure why. And none of them would tell him anything else that he had killed their families and was a terrible demon, which it was pointless, as I knew I hadn't killed anyone. Although this knowledge was the only constant that I could remember in the 11 years of survival I had achieved so far. Not that it mattered, he thought wryly as he dodged another onslaught from a villager, getting into a side street that he knew narrowed a lot halfway, so that only one person could pass comfortably. The crowd following him was closing in, although he knew that he had managed to escape now by diving through the straight, ending with a somersault that made him stand up and run, while the point in question was jammed with people who I was trying to go through it, or at the same time to reach it. Taking advantage of the precious time he had been given, he headed for the slums. The people there were much nicer to him, despite his generally dishonest occupations. None of them had raised their hands to him, and they even hid him on occasions when the crowd became too big for him to escape. Just when he thought he was about to make it, something slammed into him with the force of a cannonball, crashing him into the street wall with a scream of pain as he broke 2 ribs. Standing next to him, there was a man in a ninja uniform and Chunin bulletproof vest. A snarl could be seen on his face as he picked it up. A short sword over the head. The devil thinks he can escape, doesn't he? Not today, feel free to shout, you'll enjoy it much more, uff. The man was interrupted when he saw that a sword similar to the one he was wielding was stuck in his abdomen. Behind him stood a figure that seemed to be enveloped in the darkness itself. The bloody sword dissolved into the same shadows as he lowered his hand. The crowd had taken advantage of this time to walk down the corridor and was approaching cautiously down the street. Seeing the injured Chunin on the ground, his murmurs became more worried and urgent. The hooded figure ignored them. Instead, he knelt down and took his hand to Naruto's wounds. A green light, like the one the kind men at the hospital used to heal him, was emanating from his hand. The voice took him by surprise, and would have frightened him if the man had not saved him, and was not already healing him of his bones. Broken. Are you the Uzumaki they call Naruto? Naruto nodded hesitantly, and was surprised when the man extended his free hand and motioned for him to take it. "I am Nobunaga Kage, an ally of your clan for many years. Take my hand and we will leave here to a safe place." Naruto couldn't believe it. This man knew about his family. Without thinking for a second longer, she reached out and grabbed as much of the man's big hand as possible with her small fingers. Everything turned black for an instant before she met the man in the room of her orphanage. Even though it was empty, it was something he could say was his. The man in the cape was rummaging through his cloak while Naruto finished getting his bearings. He jumped to his feet and made his best bow before expressing himself. Thanks for coming, Kage-san. I was in a big mess before you got here. And you were saying you knew something about my family. Is it true?" Kage pulled a small scroll out of his cloak as he nodded. "It was Naruto, but first I must verify that you are a blood Uzumaki, not just an orphan with an unfortunate name. I don't want you to get your hopes up unnecessarily." Naruto nodded, understanding. He was already used to the number of times he had been given good news and then come to nothing. Although the fact that the man was testing him before telling him something false was new. "How are we going to prove it, Kage-san? That is, even Okage and Ja. He claimed he didn't know who my parents were and there was no good way to find out, so what's your plan?" Kage paused when he heard the word Okage, but recovered quite quickly. "This scroll is sealed with the blood of the Uzumaki. If you are more than a quarter Uzumaki, you should be open to putting some of your blood on it." Naruto smiled, beaming. It was an opportunity to find out if he belonged to a clan, a way to get revenge on all those idiots at the academy, who said he was nothing but a clan. Thank goodness it was a waste of space. He reached out his hand, wiped off some of the blood from the still bleeding lip, and placed it against the red seal of the scroll. Nothing happened for a moment, and Naruto was about to sigh in disappointment when the seal glowed blue, and a complex inscription became visible around the scroll, and then the seal came off. Naruto, overflowing with joy, began to jump with excitement. He was a real Uzumaki, whatever that meant. He stopped when he heard Kage laughing to himself, and the sound turned into laugh when the man shook his head. "I have spent almost 2 decades searching everywhere, in the dungeons of the noses. Elemental nations, even the rumor of a survivor of the Uzumaki clan, and yet, during all this time, there was one so close to home, in the land of our allies. Kami likes to play with me." Shaking his head once more, he fell silent, and then became serious. "But now, young heir, you must make a decision. Do you want to learn about your clan and our way of being a girl?" The man couldn't have said anything other than maybe offering ramen to pique Naruto's interest. "Of course I do. Are you going to teach me, Kaie-sensei?" The man nodded, but spoke again. "I will, but for that I must take you to your clan's house, which is far from Konoha. This means that you would have to leave with me for a year or two so that you can learn everything you can before coming back here and becoming a ninja. I guess you want to live up to the legacy of your clan." Naruto nodded. If her clan was a girl, it would be fair to learn about them. But what about Okage Jiji? I'm not sure he wants me to leave the village without him finding out. A sadistic smile was drawn on Kai's face as he stood up. "Don't worry about that, Naruto. I know your Jiji since a long time, so I will leave him a clone who will talk to him about it. I'm sure everything will be fine, so get your batteries up." Naruto cocked his head, confused, and then nodded. If Kage knew Hiji and said she would be fine, everything would be fine in her books. Without further delay, he ran around the room, collecting his few belongings from the hiding places he had created. He was going to learn and become an amazing ninja. He was great. Time jump. 30 minutes. Iris and Sarutobi rushed to the orphanage, waiting for the report she had received from an assistant. Hospital people out of breath was wrong. According to reports, an unknown man had appeared during the festival, injured a Chunin, and kidnapped Naruto, before disappearing into an unknown location in an instant of darkness. This coincided with the report of a Konoha team that was sent to a village southwest of Konoha, where a man of similar description had questioned them about the boy before disappearing in the same way. Just 2 days earlier, the distance he had covered alone made it an impressive feat. Running into Naruto's room, he found her quiet. He made all of Naruto's little hiding places open to the world's view, empty of their contents. He extended his senses, and upon finding the hidden chakra source, he moved instinctively, throwing a cradle and at the man's throat. Before he could even begin to react, intending to kill scattered, stopping at massive levels. However, the man in front of him seemed calm behind his bone-white mask, and started talking as if they were sitting having a few drinks instead of being threatened at knife point. The Uzumaki heir has already left, and I do not intend to harm him and loosen, which is better than what I can say about your village. Also, better put the crib away, and I am just a shadow who is here to discuss what will happen to the heir and his inheritance. Sarutobi glared at him while, using her chakra sense, she checked to see if he was a clone, and that the real one was not nearby. I don't trust the word of the missing ninja Nobunaga, especially one who was exiled from Yuzu by order of the last Uzumaki leader. For all I know, you will try to turn the boy against us, or worse, kill him in a petty revenge. The mask foamed and turned black, an obvious sign of the man's aversion to Sarutobi's accusations. You know better than anyone that I wouldn't raise a sword against the Uzumaki clan, not with my clan's honor at stake. I don't hold a grudge against them, and I wish to see them get stronger again. My exile is insignificant in comparison. The man accepted the room for a moment, while Sarutobi watched his slightly restrained anger, as he remembered the blood debt the Cage clan owed to the Uzumaki for having saved them during an ambush before the establishment of ninja villages, when clans traveled alone, and were often targeted by rival clans in an attempt to eliminate them. The rival clans of the Cage had united and attacked at noon, the worst time for the techniques and lineage of the Cage. And with the added difficulty of protecting non-combatants, the members of the Cage clan were in grave danger. Then, from among the trees, emerged the Uzumaki warriors, with their hair predominating red billowing in the wind, as they wreaked death among the clan attackers, forcing them to retreat quickly, leaving more than half dead or captured. To the surprise of the Cage clans, the Uzumaki did not torture or humiliate their captured enemies as many clans did back then, turning them into servants or, even worse, into sexual objects for reproduction, as some of the most barbaric clans were known to do. Instead, the Uzumaki tended to the wounded on both sides quickly, and then sent one of the captured members back to his clan, with an offer. Negotiations for his return. Soon after, the Uchiha and Senju clans would settle together in Konoha, making people starting in the era believe that it would give rise to the great ninja villages, but in reality it was the Cage, Uzumaki, and the two clans with whom they had fought that day, those who formed the village of Uzukasi. 2 months earlier, with the three clans pledging allegiance to the Uzumaki, and the village named after them, as they were the most numerous ninja of the clans, and the other clans saw the Uzumaki as the best to run the village, as they didn't have any possible history with the other clans that could cause tensions in the future of the villages. But that aside, there was still the fact that Naruto was now in the hands of a ninja outside Konoha who was unaware of the boy's burden, not even his lineage. However, even if you don't hurt him, it is a fact that you are one of the most wanted ninjas of the elemental nations, and the village of Iwa craves your head almost as much as that of the four Hokage. The last thing Naruto needs is that level of hatred directed towards him at this age. Cage chuckled wryly and looked at the Hokage in disbelief. You say that, when they chase the child all over the village, they exclude him from the orphanage he considers. It was his home for no reason, and he's being threatened with physical harm. No, actually that's not the right phrase, it was real torture. At the hands of your own child. I think being with me and dealing with the occasional glory hunter will give him a good break. The man stopped walking and chuckled. Not that it matters if you approve or not, the truth is that we've already left the village. And you know what happens to hunter ninjas who chase me, so I wouldn't bother. What I want to know the most is when can I send Naruto back to become a ninja? Sarutobi watched him in surprise. What do you mean? I thought you were going to teach him the way of the Yuzu. Cage shook his head and cleared up. I will teach him just that, and all the Uzumaki knowledge I got to know in the meantime. But I refuse to let the Uzumaki just disappear. They must be reborn somewhere, and Konoha is as good a place as any to do it. Despite the feelings of civilians, it is better than Kumo or Iwa. Therefore, he must be a Konoha ninja, not a Ronin or a mercenary. Sarutobi relaxed. Kage wouldn't be able to reveal any of the secrets he didn't want Naruto to know yet, about his inheritance, nor give him knowledge about his tenant, but at the same time, he would train him as his mother would have wanted. And therefore, he would return as a much stronger ninja. It's 2 years until his age group enters the final year of the academy, so you have until then to train him. I hope he will return in early June of that year. I also want a report every 6 months, and you need to stay away from Kumo Iwa. They are the ones who would take the most advantage of you having a student to try to use it against you. Sarutobi felt the years slipping away from him as he dictated the terms of this training trip. Pretty forced. He was no longer the old man, forced to return to work after the tragic events of the night of Naruto's birth. That led to the death of his successor, but the commander of the Konoha army, the feared Kamino Shinobi. Kage nodded. Fair enough, and I'll be around after that. Your security is so bad they couldn't stop me anyway. See you in 2 years, man. And with that, the clone left, obviously on his way to inform his master. One of his Ambu guards appeared from under his Genjutsu hideout. We followed him, Okage-sama. Saruto, and shook his head. There were other things to do. No, Bor, we won't. Naruto will be safe with him. In the meantime, I want you to round up the orphanage staff. Evidently, someone has been lying to me about Naruto's well-being. And that man from the hospital, take him to Ibiki as soon as he recovers. I think he has falsified his statement about what happened between him and Nobunaga. 2 of their ambus left, and less than a minute later, they were replaced by 2 more members. It wouldn't do any good to leave him unguarded with a rogue ninja who was possibly still in the village. With a sigh, he walked away at a calmer pace this time. There was still paperwork to be done before I could return home. Hopefully, she would be able to see her daughter before she went to bed that night. Last time in the shadows of Yuzu. It's 2 years until his age group enters the final year of academy, so you have until then to train him. I hope he will return in early June of that year. I also want a report every 6 months, and you need to stay away from Kumo Iwa. They are the ones who would take the most advantage of you having a student to try to use it against you. Sarutobi felt the years slipping away from him as he dictated the terms of this rather forced training trip. He was no longer the old man, forced to return to work after the tragic events of the night of Naruto's birth. That led to the death of his successor, but the commander of the Konoha army, the feared Kamino Shinobi. Kage ascended. Fair enough, and I'll be around after that. Your security is so bad that they couldn't stop me anyway. See you in 2 years, man. And with that, the clone left, obviously on his way to inform his master. One of his Ambu guards appeared from under his Genjutsu hideout. We followed him, Okage-sama. Sarutobi shook his head. There were other things to do. No, Bor, we won't. Naruto will be safe with him. In the meantime, I want you to round up the orphanage staff. Obviously, someone has been lying to me about Naruto's well-being. And that man from the hospital, take him to Ibiki as soon as he recovers. I think he has falsified his statement about what happened between him and Nobunaga. 2 of their ambus left, and less than a minute later, they were replaced by 2 more members. It wouldn't do any good to leave him unguarded with a rogue ninja. That he was possibly still in the village. With a sigh, he walked away at a calmer pace this time. There was still paperwork to be done before I could return home. Hopefully, she would be able to see her daughter before she went to bed that night. And now, the new chapter, time jump. 2 years. Change of person. Katezu, Chunin from Konoha. Katezu sold the entry forms for what was supposed to be the 1000th merchant caravan of the day. His partner Izumo had used his chakra senses to search for possible infiltrated ninjas among the group, in addition to essentially searching the caravans. You challenge in search of contraband or illegal materials. It was not a difficult task, and only occasionally they would find some missing Genin-level ninja who came seeking asylum from their past. And taking care of them was the responsibility of the Ambu patrols that covered the walls. However, he liked to think that they were useful, making sure that the doors of Konoha will never be left unprotected or vulnerable. He was about to lean back in his chair when, suddenly, Izumo stiffened and looked towards the road. Such a reaction wouldn't have made anyone else raise an eyebrow, but Katetsu had been working with Izumo for almost 10 years. And they both knew each other's little reactions, to the point that they needed nothing more than a glance to transmit plans and conversations. Kotetsu stood up and was at Izumo's side the next instant, his hand on his kunai bag, while he was secretly joking. "What's the matter, Izumo? Is there a group of geese coming?" Izumo's gaze didn't deviate even to answer Kotetsu's humorous question, and Kotetsu was about to ask again when Izumo finally spoke. "Someone is approaching, yes, but his chakra is off the scale, and he is as wild as anything I have ever seen." Those words made Kotetsu straighten up and start scanning the horizon, at the same time unfolding his chakra. I knew it would be a small waste, but it was the fastest way to alert the nearest Ambu squadron. If this man's chakra was as powerful as Izumo claimed, they would need reinforcements quickly. After a minute, a figure appeared on the horizon, and unconsciously, both Izumo and Kotetsu shuddered, getting ready. After a few seconds, Kotetsu relaxed as he perceived the features of the figure with his keen eyesight. "Izumo, he's just a kid. I'm sure you just read his chakra." He was interrupted when he felt the chakra of the boy, who had just appeared next to them with a stealthy and fast movement that, if Kotetsu had not felt it, he would not have believed it even if it had been told to him in a bar. Kotetsu turned defensively at the same time as Izumo, drawing their weapons. As they were presented with the previously familiar smiling face of the resident container, dressed in simple brown clothes and a bulky black cape, the boy then spoke as if he had just approached them, instead of sneaking up on them. In a threatening way. "Hello, Naruto Uzumaki. Apply to enter the village of Konoha. I think the Okage is waiting for me." "Wait a minute, why are they targeting me?" The newly revealed blonde man raised his hands in an appeasing manner, while Kotetsu and Izumo had Kuna and up and ready to fight. "The Okage is expecting you in 3 days, Uzumaki-san. That's why we hadn't warned the guards of your possible arrival yet." The voice made the three of them look towards the door, where they found a squad of 3 ambus in a relaxed attitude, headed by an ambu in a cat mask, who looked at the boy with obvious disapproval, while he was scratching the back of his head in a reflex action. "Ah, I knew I had forgotten something when I decided to arrive a little faster. Gomen to Seineko-san, I should leave and come back in 2 days." Kotetsu almost lost his composure in surprise at Uzumaki's absurd question, and he saw that he was not the only one. Since Izumo's disbelief was much more evident, Neko shook her head in disbelief and replied with no less humorous tone. "No, you can come in now. Naruto, Okage-sama, he will be surprised, but I guess he will be delighted. The last thing I need is for you to be getting on my nerves around here. To the guards for the next 2 days. They told me you were bringing someone else with you." Naruto shook his head. "Kage-sense, and has gone to look for other information he has collected. I am sure he will come back soon. See you at the tower. I doubt Konoha has changed enough to make me lose my sense of direction." Neko shook her head once more, something Kotetsu sensed that people would do a lot more in the future because of the blonde boy's actions, especially with his new and seemingly powerful powers. "I'm afraid you'll have to come with me to see it, Naruto. The other ambu have not been informed of your arrival, and your chakra will make them nervous, something you do not need on your first day back." Naruto shrugged his shoulders and gave him a wide smile. "Well, you better get going, Neko-chan. I didn't want him to leave you behind." Neko just chuckled, and she jumped away, followed closely by Naruto. The other 2 Zumbu disappeared in Shuzans, returning to their patrol routine, leaving the 2 Chunin bewildered without the slightest explanation of what happened. Izumo spoke first, in a low voice, as if he expected to be watched and heard by forces invisible. "Kotetsu, I think things are going to get a lot more chaotic around here again, and I don't think any infiltrated ninja has anything to do with it." Kotetsu couldn't help but agree with Izumo, although he didn't express it. The container of the Kyuubi had left as a simple orphan with no skills, and hated by people, and now he had returned, without at least his personality seeming to have changed. But now, with considerable abilities that surpassed those of a normal ninja, any villager stupid enough to attack him would be the one who would be in grave danger, not the other way around. Interestingly, Kotetsu wasn't too bothered by the idea. In fact, it would be a good way to deal with several of the more idiotic members of the civilian population, who were causing problems for everyone, not just Naruto. The more he thought about it, the better it sounded, and he let out a cheerful whistle, ignoring the strange look he threw at her. He would tell her later, and she would probably find it as funny as he did. Yes, Naruto had returned, and all hell would probably break loose at any moment. Earlier, in the shadows of Atsu, Izumo spoke first, in a low voice, as if he expected to be observed and heard by invisible forces. Kotetsu, I think things are going to get a lot more chaotic around here again, and I don't think any infiltrated ninja has anything to do with it. Kotetsu couldn't help but agree with Izumo, although he didn't express it. The container of the Kyuubi had left as a simple vegetable garden, without skills and hated by people, and now he had returned, without at least his personality seemed to have changed. But now, with considerable abilities that surpassed those of a normal ninja, any villager stupid enough to attack him would be the one who would be in grave danger, not the other way around. Interestingly, Kotetsu wasn't too bothered by the idea. In fact, it would be a good way to deal with several of the more idiotic members of the civilian population, who were causing problems for everyone, not just Naruto. The more he thought about it, the better it sounded, and he let out a cheerful whistle, ignoring the strange look she was throwing at him. I would tell him later, and he would probably find it as funny as he did. Yes, Naruto had returned, and all hell would probably break loose at any moment. New chapter. It begins. Time jump. 20 minutes. Change of people. Irizen Sarutobi, third cage of Konoha. Sarutobi looked up from his work, slightly surprised to feel the speed of the approaching chakra signatures, but smiling warmly when Neko and Naruto appeared through the window. The pace at which Neko was traveling, and more importantly, the pace that Naruto was following, was impressive. Undoubtedly greater than any of his current genin could reach at such a distance without running out of breath. Although he supposed that Naruto had always had an advantage in physical training thanks to his tenant, so it was to hope now that he had received proper one-on-one coaching. Looking more closely with his experienced eyes, Sarutobi noticed the firm stance Naruto adopted as he straightened up. That of a warrior now, unlike the boy who had left with Kage 2 years earlier. Naruto wiped his face once, then listened to Sarutobi, in a way that would have made him want to respond, even if he hadn't already. Long time no see, Gigi, I see the paperwork is as bad as ever. Do you want to quit and eat ramen? Saruto turned to himself, as Neko attacked like a coiled snake, and Naruto staggered at a blow to the ear with a scream. However, Naruto had tried to dodge the blow that Sarutobi noticed, so his reflexes and sense of danger were developed at the same level as his speed, which was always useful, as it meant that a fighter would not. He would react in a way that his body could not follow, nor would he move at a speed that made his reactions much less efficient because of its pace. Neko spoke angrily to the blonde in front of him, her hand still outstretched and ready. Despite the fact that the rest of her posture was strictly professional in front of her leader during such a strange meeting, Naruto-san shows respect to Okage-sama. Just because you've been out and about with a member of your clan doesn't mean everyone should be treated like family. Sarutobi raised his hand, silencing the rest of his speech. She had to admit that she never imagined that Neko would act so motherly in the face of Naruto's actions. The reason why he had become so nervous became apparent for a moment. Later, when Naruto spoke, with the face of a freshly kicked kitten. Ah, I'm sorry, Neko-chan. It's just that Okage-sama and I have known each other for a long time, so it's like family. And he hasn't scolded me for it yet. I'll try to be less familiar with strangers in the future, Neko-chan. Neko's face mask made her expression indecipherable, but Sarutobi could see from her posture that she was resisting the urge to break down and hit or hug the boy. I wasn't sure which of the two options, and I didn't want to wait to find out which one would be carried out. Speaking before anyone could matter, interrupting him, he stood up at the same time, turning the table around. You're right, Neko. Naruto is like a grandson of mine, although I admit I can't keep him in the village no matter how hard I try. The laughter at Naruto's stupidity became lighter when he motioned to the boy to come and give him a hug. It bothered her a little that the guy was now next to her when they met. It seemed that the time of hugs with another member of his close family would soon end. Naruto pulled away, with a regretful expression this time, instead of trying to be nice, as he had done to Neko. I'm sorry, Gigi, but I knew my family and their history, even if I didn't know my parents. And well, now that I think about it, I see that I should have waited to make sure that I talked to you instead of leaving with a stranger. But it was still the best thing I could have done. I have learned a lot with him." At that moment, Sarutobi's gaze turned to Neko. And he knew that she had grasped that this trip contained more than Sarutobi had told anyone who had not been present that night, even one of his best agents, who had proved his loyalty to him over and over again. "I know you did. Read your letters, it confirms me that I will not leave, but where is Cage? I wanted to offer him asylum here in Konoha, so that he could rest and continue to help you." Naruto shrugged his shoulders disdainfully, unconsciously searching for a small pendant on his cloak. "I'm sorry, Gigi. Cage said he had heard about a red-haired girl in the grassland with Uzumaki features who was raised an orphan. So he went to find out if she was an Uzumaki too. I guess he will be busy at least the next few months." Sarutobi became suspicious. Cage had been a loose cannon, even when he was tied to Yuzu. He imagined that even if he joined the village upon arrival, he would be like his former student Jiraiya, who spent years outside the village, taking care of its information networks and building a network of favors and agents to help Konoha in case of another war breaking out. So there's nothing we can do about it right now, except wait for his return. Now, Naruto, while you've been away, I've been researching the orphanage, and I've discovered that they treated not only you, but also other children, with the care that was required of them. Therefore, I have taken you out of the orphanage with some of the money that I have confiscated from them. They were preparing your new apartment building, but due to your premature return, it's not ready yet. Therefore, you will be my guest for the next 2 nights. I know my daughter Rhea has missed your antics these last 2 years." Naruto's smile flashed, such was its intensity. "Thank you, Gigi, that's great news. I would love to meet the rest of my unofficial family." Saruto turned to his teeth, and then asked with a slightly more serious tone, "Where are your belongings? I guess Cage likes to travel light, but leave you alone with the clothes you're wearing. It wouldn't be like him." Naruto looked confused, and then shook his head, understanding. "I guess he didn't tell you then, it wouldn't surprise me. Sometimes he forgets the most important thing. Cage has been teaching me what he knows about them, and when we were at the ruins of Yuzu, he agreed to several the warehouses that had been hidden enough to survive the assault and the attention of the scavengers. These contained more blood seal scrolls that we were able to access, which taught us both more about the subject than Cage could have hoped to teach me. So all my belongings, just as those scrolls are sealed in various places on my clothes that only I can access." Sarutovilla felt secretly dizzy from the thought that had occurred to her while Naruto was talking. As much as I tried not to force Naruto to follow the path of a child, a way of life that Sarutovilla she had always defended, she had to be chosen by the individual, not forced on her as they were in some of the smaller villages. If they had a lineage or skill that was useful for the power and prosperity of the villages, he couldn't help but be sure that the Uzumaki seals, who had been so advanced as to infiltrate the village undetected, had been impossible for anyone but the second Tsuchikage, who had been famous for his infiltration and assassination skills that were the best in history, would soon be defending Konoha if Naruto was anything like his clan members when it came to skills with the stamps. Remembering that Neko was still present, and that he would definitely need a report after what he had heard in the office that morning, the best thing was to fire Naruto so he could get back to the paperwork before it piled up again without him noticing. As always happened on days like that. "Okay, Naruto, well, I'll let you go to refresh your knowledge about the village and its layout. I need to get on with my job after all, lest I drown after you leave." Naruto laughed at the joke, already familiar, and moving forward, understanding. "Of course, Gigi, I'll see you tonight." And without waiting, he walked out the front door, greeting a very surprised secretary. Once Sarutobi confirmed with his bodyguards that Naruto was away from the area, he turned to Neko, who was still steadfastly waiting for an order. "Easy, Yugao, I have a feeling we have a lot to discuss before that I can return to work previously in the shadows of Yuzu." As much as he tried not to force Naruto to follow the path of a child, a way of life that Sarutobi had always championed had to be chosen by the individual, not forced upon her as they were in some of the smaller villages. If they had a lineage, skill that was useful for the power and prosperity of the villages, he could not help but be sure that the Uzumaki seals, which had been so advanced that infiltrating the village undetected had been impossible, even for the second Tsuchikage, who had been famous for his infiltration and assassination skills of. Due to his unique abilities, he would soon be defending Konoha if Naruto was anything like his clan members when it came to seal skills. Remembering that Neko was still around and would definitely need a report after what he had heard at the office that morning, the best thing was to fire Naruto so he could pick up the paperwork before it piled up again without him noticing, as always happened on days like that. Okay, Naruto, well, I'll let you go to refresh your knowledge about the village and its layout. I need to get on with my job after all, lest you drown me after I'm gone. Naruto laughed at the joke, already familiar between them, and nodded understanding. Of course, Gigi, I'll see you tonight. And without waiting, he walked out the front door, greeting a very surprised secretary. Once Sarutobi confirmed with his bodyguards that Naruto was away from the area, he turned to Neko, who was still firmly waiting for an order. Easy, Yugao, I have a feeling we have a lot to discuss before I can get back to work. The Shadows of Yuzu, Chapter 4. I'm going back to school, and hating every minute of it. It didn't take long for Naruto to reconnect with the village. Apart from a change in patrol schedules and the expansion or closure of several high street shops, everything was still the same as when he left. If he had been the same guy as when he left with Cage, he probably would have announced his return with some ostentatious joke. However, among other things that Cage had taught him about life in general, besides being a child, he had gained respect for the idea of anonymity and apathy, instead of angering the villagers from the very beginning. Therefore, the Okage had informed him which class he would be in when the academy reopened after from the summer holidays. He had had limited interaction with the class in question, except for a somewhat childish crush he felt for one of the girls in the class, a civilian named Sakura Aruno, whom he met in preschool. That had been quickly forgotten under the tutelage of Cage and the Longs well that they had done. She was the first person I had found. Surprisingly, I was alone, reading in one of the many parks that covered the interior of the village. She seemed much calmer than he remembered her, but she was definitely not the dazzling beauty that Sue had evoked by initially remembering her. She was pretty, no doubt, but her violent tendencies sometimes turned out to be quite unpleasant, and that was putting it mildly. Leaving her, he followed several members of his future class, and, in general, he was disappointed with all of them. Cage had always shown that Naruto was not as powerful as he thought, stating that modesty was the basis of strength. However, at the same time, there were these guys who prioritized their academy training over their non-ninja friends. Although most guys would have a hard time passing the academic parts of the exams with their current status, and most of the girls were too busy chasing the last Uchiha, who, oddly enough, was also in their class along with several other great heirs of the Konoha clan. The Great Clans, as they were called by those who lived outside Konoha, comprised the 10 most influential clans in the city. These were the Akimichi clan, the Yamanaka clan, the Nara clan, the Abraham clan, the Inzuku clan, the Yuga clan, the Senju clan, the Kurama clan, the Atake clan, and the Uchiha clan, all with their own ninja techniques or lineages that made them unique and more powerful than those outside the clans. However, during the last 40 years, 4 of these clans had fallen into decline, the Uchi being the most recent of them, the victim of a bloody massacre that took place during Naruto's first year out of the country. The massacre was carried out by the heir, the clan heir, and although information about what happened that night was scarce at best, it was known that the younger brother of the clan heir was the only survivor, and that his brother had used his Dojutsu or lineage linked by the eyes, called Sharingan, to induce some kind of mental attack in the boy, which left him in the hospital for almost 2 months, delaying his admission to the academy that same year. The Senju clan and the Atake clan were reduced to their last members, and both resisted the council's efforts to force them to start repopulating their numbers. The Kurama clan was in troubled waters in a different way. His lineage was becoming more erratic, to the point that his most talented member had been removed from the academy, due to him losing control of his lineage. The fact that all the other great heirs of the clan were in the same class was interesting news to ponder, for Naruto pondered later as the Uchiha in question came in half an hour earlier and sat in what was obviously his place, about halfway across the room by one of the windows left. Enter the sunlight of Konoha. He was also the first to arrive, apart from Naruto, of course, who was hidden under a minor genjutsu at the back of the room, and had been there almost an hour before the start of the academy to make sure he was the first to arrive. He could not cast genjutsu properly due to his terrible chakra control, despite his and Cage's attempts to fix it. Therefore, the genjutsu was created with the brooch of his long jacket that Cage had engraved on him. He only had to supply the chakra to feed the illusion that made those who were looking at him want to look away, in addition to making them forget that they had seen him, a rather ingenious technique, although with a high consumption of chakra. It was almost 5 minutes before the next arrival, a civilian girl who thought her name was Itomi. At that instant, he was surprised to see Lucci coming out with a book, no less, a suspense thriller, about a group of Black Ops ninjas during the Third War. Shinobi, something he didn't think Iluchia would allow himself if he listened to the girls following him. Everything changed, of course, the moment Itomi entered. The book was in Lucia's backpack and disappeared from sight with an impressive speed. Iluchia adopted a thoughtful pose that Naruto looked like, to understand as something normal in him. For the next 20 minutes, people came into the room. No one noticed him, not even the girl Yuga, who was worried that he activated his Dojutsu, the all-seeing Ivaikugan, which allowed him to see chakra in a 360 dome around him. Since his genjutsu was overflowing with chakra, he would have noticed it clearly. The classroom finally filled up just a few minutes after 9 in the morning. The only gaps were the seats on either side of Naruto. Professor Chunin, whose name was Umino Iruka, whom Naruto had found after doing some research, entered 2 minutes later, of the end, and stood at the front of the class, obviously waiting for the silence of the children in front of him. After 30 seconds of continuous muttering, Iruka had obviously had enough and suddenly spoke up, transforming into a giant demonic version of his normal face, his voice loud and terrifying without having then shouting too much for the class to be silent. Naruto was impressed with such an interesting unsigned genjutsu, or at least he expected it to be a genjutsu. Otherwise, it was a worrying lineage. This reassured the class, who were staring at the Chunin in stunned silence. Knowing that he now had her undivided attention, Iruka's head returned to its normal size, and he opened the cash register on his desk to check that all the students were present. He called them by their name until he pronounced Sasuke's, and then stopped, looking at the name below with obvious astonishment. Naruto Uzumaki. People looked around confused at the unknown name, although Iruka noticed that Sakura and a couple of the others recognized him. He sighed and withdrew the chakra flow from his bracelet, breaking the genjutsu, and revealing himself by getting up and screaming, "Here, Iruka-sensei." He found the reactions to his appearance certainly funny, and had to restrain his laughter when he saw those around him fall out of their seats in surprise. Several girls screamed, the boys screamed in a way that they would later describe as manly, and one poor girl fainted. It certainly wasn't the expected reaction from studying in their final year of training before becoming battle-ready mercenaries. The only 3 who reacted properly, according to Naruto, were Sasuke, who stood up at the surprise appearance behind him, reaching into his crib bag, and in a knee-jerk reaction. However, the surprises for Naruto were Sakura and Nada. The latter jumped into the gap between the rows while activating her Yakugan, while the former even threw a kunai at him. While spinning in her seat, he caught the kunai by the ring just inches from his face serene. Even when Iruka finally relaxed enough to contain his instincts, which had been prompting him to throw a sword at the intruder. Naruto then left the row of desks and went down the stairs, while the whole class watched him with some apprehension. He stopped in front of Sakura and offered her the crib. There, talking in an indifferent tone, "I think this is yours, Aruno-san." She grabbed him quickly, blushing slightly as she quickly looked away, embarrassed. An instant later, Naruto returned to his seat with a speed that many of the students at the academy could not get, although Iruka watched him with something akin to distrust and concern. Only by chance did Naruto know why Iruka was looking at him like that, at him and at most of the adults in the village. It was during his training with Kaie-sensei, in the wilds of the Fire Country. Flashback scene. It had been almost 6 months since the two strange companions had been traveling through the land of fire. After almost 2 weeks since they left the hidden village, Kage finally confessed that she had technically kidnapped him from Konoha. Naruto took it surprisingly well, because he just did. He tried to go back to the village once, before Kage tied him up and explained that the Hokage had given the green light to the trip, as long as Naruto wrote him letters regularly about his training. The question about this announcement had been the subject of the first of those letters to the Hokage, and Naruto had only truly calmed down when he received the answer, courtesy of the Kage spies who regularly came and went from the main outposts in the country, detailing in each mail article he sent to the Hokage where he would call next and when to, that the answers could be written in time to be delivered. With that little problem solved, Kage started his training for real. He started with a hard physical training regimen that soon even left Naruto with a somewhat impressive endurance on the verge of failure. Although Naruto had to admit that the results were hard to ignore, after 3 months, Kage declared that his body strength was at the height of a Yuzu graduate ninja, so it was time to work on the other aspects that they were contributing to shinobi life. Then, they worked on tactics and knowledge, the history of great nations, and the politics of present-day villages and nations. When Naruto asked him why he needed to learn such things, since they did not help him become a super powerful shinobi, Kage pointed out that the Hokage should know them so as not to accidentally anger a powerful noble or a village and therefore bring the war to his village and his people. Naruto got down to work quickly. After that, though he noticed that his difficulties with the material were driving him crazy. Still, they persevered until Kage lost his patience. Actually, it wasn't Naruto's fault that Kage had lost his patience, but trying to teach him something based on books, without regular breaks of effort. Physically, it was probably the most difficult thing that Kage had lived through. As concentrated theoretical work was considered impossible, Kage drew up a new training plan. After reflecting for almost 2 days, during which he exhausted Naruto with his shadows, a secret technique of his clans, that allowed him to create solid clones capable of thinking for themselves and using their chakra to create techniques, Kage. He decided that it would be a good idea to teach Naruto some basic techniques before developing his shadow technique. These required heavy use of chakra, but all you ninjas were known for their higher than normal chakra ability. So even though Kage couldn't use them like he used to, some of his techniques weren't exhausting for him to use regularly. So the next month, he spent teaching Naruto 3 techniques and trying to teach him several more. Naruto adapted like a fish in water to the cow. And after an hour, the only thing Kage could tell him to improve the techniques was that he used too much chakra to complete the technique, which caused a huge cloud of smoke to erupt when making the change. The flash jutsu, a simple technique that produced a flash of powerful white light when completed. It was something that Kage considered vital to learn, although it was never explained why it was so important. It was the cloning jutsu that Naruto had managed to master, and Kage assumed that this was possibly due to the instability of his chakra, whose density changed and deformed from one instant to the next. This in itself was not bad, it just meant that, for such low-cost chakra techniques, it was very difficult not to accidentally overload them. In an attempt to help Naruto master his chakra a little more, as well as to allow Kage some peace, Kage sat him down and instructed him in the art of meditation. It had been a difficult task to achieve with Naruto's energy levels and his seemingly permanent hyperactivity, but finally, Naruto managed to master the concepts and spent an hour daily calming his chakra, sinking deeper and deeper into the posture. This continued until he finally woke up and found himself in the field, where he and Kage had been training, but in a strange building, almost like a sewer because of the structure, the blue and red pipes that covered the walls, and, finally, the water that accumulated on the floor. Looking towards the corridors, he noticed a light shining at one end of the passage and felt some curiosity about what was happening to him. Since he had exercised his chakra the way Kage had taught him to dispel genjutsu without no effect, he walked slowly along the path, his feet splashing on the watery ground. although he did not notice any sensation of water splashing on him from the movements. What he was doing, but he ignored it for now, he might understand it better later. Arriving at the light, he discovered that it was actually a set of bright bars, easily 100 times his height, and each of the 20 bars, easily twice his width, inscribed with kanji so dense that only by taking a step forward, he could make out that it was they who were shining, and not the whole bar. As he moved forward, something moved in the darkness, in what Naruto a moment later designated as a cage. He had to quickly back up to dodge a giant claw, one of the three that had the huge paw that stretched out around the bars to fit in. Straightening up as he turned to observe his attacker, Naruto couldn't help a shiver running down his spine, as he encountered the smiling face of a giant red-furred fox, whose eyes were full of amusement and anger. "So close, even though you've come to visit. Earlier than I thought, so I can be forgiven for not being prepared, right, my little jailer?" End of the flashback. That had been one of the scariest experiences in Naruto's short life, and once he revealed it to Kage. Upon managing to get out of what they discovered was his mental escape, the man in the masquerade told him not to try contacting him again. He had met Viju containers before, and the more they used the chakra of their Viju, the crazier and more dangerous they seemed to become, not only to their enemies, but also to their allies and the innocent bystanders who might be at their around when they invoked the chakra of their internals. Another thing that Naruto didn't want to happen in the least. He was glad to know at least now why everyone hated him when he was young, and why some still distrusted him now that he had returned. His reflexes interrupted him, shouting that something was coming at him from the front of the class. Without thinking, after being tested repeatedly by Kage, he grabbed the offending object and threw it with some chakra in the direction he had come from. A rumble was heard, and as he observed what had happened for the first time, he was met with the stunned stares of the entire class. Iruka moved sideways, after narrowly dodging the blackboard he had thrown at Naruto for some reason. The offending object was now embedded in the wall behind the shattered chalkboard, and an eruption of Pisa was the only movement for a moment. Scratching the back of his neck, Naruto smiled apologetically, and then spoke quickly. "I'm sorry, Iruka-sensei, did you want something?" Previously in Shadow Fuzu, that had been one of the scariest experiences in Naruto's short life, and once he revealed it to Kage. Upon managing to get out of what he discovered to be his mental escape, the masked man told him not to try to contact him again. He had met Viju containers before, and the more they used the chakra of their Viju, the crazier and more dangerous they seemed to become, not only to their enemies, but also to their allies and the innocent bystanders who might be at their around when they were invoking the chakra of its interns. Another thing that Naruto didn't want to happen in the least. He was glad to know at least now why everyone hated him when he was young, and why some still distrusted him now that he had returned. His reflexes interrupted him, shouting that something was coming at him from the front of the class. Without thinking, after being tested repeatedly by Kage, he grabbed the offending object and threw it with some chakra in the direction he had come from. A rumble was heard, and as he observed what had happened for the first time, he was met with the stunned stares of the entire class. Iruka moved sideways, after narrowly dodging the board he had thrown at Naruto for some reason. The offending object was now embedded in the wall behind the shattered chalkboard, and an eruption of chalk was the only movement for a moment. Scratching the back of his neck, Naruto smiled apologetically, and then spoke quickly. "I'm sorry, Iruka-sensei, did you want something?" Consequence of an act, after his peculiar way of introducing himself to his classmates. It was not surprising that the class avoided him both inside and outside the classroom. Some glances were probably done by order of his parents, Naruto thought ironically as he headed to his usual place. In the upper right seat of the classroom, passing by a civilian boy who was fulminating him with the law of Sandaime. He had prevented the adults from directly mentioning Naruto's case as the container, but Hiji had obviously underestimated the hatred and ingenuity of a good part of the population. Civilian. They had carefully and indirectly poisoned the minds of their children against the object of their hatred and fear. And thanks to social pressure, that aversion and evasion had spread through the academy like wildfire before their departure, and his return seemed to have rekindled that hatred, although not at the same levels as before. Although that only explained part of the evasion, Naruto thought as Akura walked into the classroom. She looked up to where he was sitting for a moment before she realized he was looking at her, and lowered her gaze as she occupied his seemingly usual seat at the front of the class. The strange behavior of whom Naruto remembered to be a smart, but very confident and frank girl, confused him for a moment. But he ignored it as part of the girl's puberty process, something he would not understand now and hoped not. Never understand. The other girls seemed to copy the actions of the last Uchiha, who seemed to have started fulminating Naruto with an eye to every opportunity. He assumed it was because the boy suspected that Naruto had been present to see him break his usual coldness with his choice of reading. If asked about the Uchiha and his opinion about the boy, Naruto would simply reply that he disliked the choice. Obvious attention he had received to reach the level of prodigy that everyone was bragging about on the walls of Konoha. So far, he had seen the teachers specializing in ninjutsu, cheating and evasion, stealth, and the fitness instructor give him additional one-on-one training during the class in certain of those who really needed it, as well as teaching him special movements and advanced techniques that they never shared with the rest of the class. Only Iruka did not have any favors for him during the classes, and to Naruto's surprise, Iluchia seemed to pay more attention in these, listening attentively to him and occasionally muttering questions at the end of the class to Iruka or to the assistant Professor Mizuki. This apparent defiance of the very ones he seemed to realize he was getting didn't stop Naruto from observing, while the Genjutsu master went over the practices of the cancellation technique for the 12th time. In less than a month of teaching the subject, without even considering the idea of throwing a genjutsu that one was thrown at them. The official stance was that the academy did not want to use even the most basic forms of genjutsu, as they might scare or leave emotional after effects on students before they were really ready to face the shinobi life after graduation. If you ask Naruto, it's pure nonsense to appease civilians. If graduating genin did not get a genjutsu specialist sensei, they would fall prey to the weaker genjutsu launchers on their missions. Kage had spent almost 3 months throwing genjutsu of various kinds at him, so that he would get used to detecting the presence of genjutsu due to the presence of alien chakra in his chakra system. Even with that combined experience, it was still a dilemma if Naruto had any idea that he was using a genjutsu, and poor control caused him various problems to dispel them, even if he managed to detect them. But he stopped thinking about his shortcomings when the class bell rang and the professor, whose name he had forgotten and would probably never remember at the academy, finally stopped talking monotonously and waved his hand disdainfully, as if he was scaring the class away so they wouldn't distract him anymore. Naruto would normally get upset about being ignored, but the excitement for the next class overcame this reaction firmly, and he almost got fired from the classroom. The reason for his enthusiasm? The taijutsu class, of course. What else? During the last 3 weeks, they had gone through the advanced style tastings of the Konoha Academy, in which Naruto had not participated, since he had his own style that he had been working on. The style of Uzumaki's Kage had told him that while torturing the boy in the first 4 tastings, with his absence, everyone assumed that he was no good at taijutsu at all, but Naruto didn't mind that assumption, even going so far as to take his katana to classes to make it look like he was working on weapon dexterity instead of hand-to-hand combat. If people had wrong ideas about his abilities, that would only help him if he had to face them for any reason. Something I had to keep in mind today, since it was the first session in which the members of the class would practice their skills physically. Although he wanted to prove himself against someone other than Kage, who crushed him with such conviction every time they trained. It was surprising that he had confidence in his ability. He wanted to keep his known abilities to a minimum, so people wouldn't start talking about his strength being due to the fox trapped in his stomach. Therefore, he was hoping for an easy pairing today, as that would allow him to win convincingly without too much effort. Although he doubted that he would be so lucky, as he led the group towards the training ground, where Iruka and Mizuki were waiting for them. Iruka spoke with a smile as he watched those in front of him. Afternoon class, I hope you are ready for this, your first observed battle. They will all face random opponents, and for the first 6 months, it will be boy against boy and girl against girl, until they have a little more experience. The rules are simple, only taijutsu, no ninjutsu, clan techniques or chakra enhancements. The winner is the one who incapacitates his opponent or forces him out of the rink. As we progress, we will allow the use of techniques and weapons, and then we will have a tournament in the middle of the year. To determine the best taijutsu user of the year, after the Academy Field course and the simulated mission, of course. Do you understand? Everyone nodded, some visibly more eager for a fight than others. Mainly the boys and Nuzuka and Uchiha were warming up and getting ready. Although from Sakura's look as she glared angrily at a couple of civilian girls, Iruka imagined that she was also eager to settle scores. Iruka then gestured to the side. If everyone who is not fighting can stay away from the rink and not try to distract any of the fighters while the fight is going on, then they will be able to watch. If any of you cause problems from the band, you will be forced to wait inside. Now, the first two wrestlers of the afternoon. Iruka named two of the civilian boys who entered the rink, greeting each other and forming academy poses. Iruka commented on each pose and what could be improved before starting the fight. Both started cautiously, their initial exchange dominated by dagger punches and kicks before getting more and more involved in the fight. Despite Iruka's repeated exclamations for them to return to the correct posture, they gradually began to resume a more natural fight. That left them severely bruised, even before one of them managed to deal him hard punch in the face of the other, leaving him on the ground with a bloody nose. Iruka ended the fight, giving both of them a talk about the correct form and its uses before sending them to the infirmary for treatment. The next match was between Inoue Manaka and Annie, a match that the blonde dominated with movement that he had obviously learned from his family. Annie, on the other hand, showed an acceptable style, but it was obvious that she was not used to facing someone in combat. So she was easily confused by the different style she was facing. In less than 2 minutes, Ami fell backwards to the ground, while Iruka turned to give a talk to the class about the different styles they might face on the battlefield. And she did not shake her hair with a selfish air before leaving the rink, among the screams of several guys, visibly in love with her. Without thinking, Naruto walked over to the rink and headed towards the fallen girl, noticing out of the corner of his eye that both Chunin stiffened in response, before Iruka continued as if nothing had happened. Ami seemed to be watching him intently, and shivered slightly when he reached out his hand to help her up. Before gingerly accepting it and getting up, she sat up quite tightly and clung to him before either of them noticed. A moment later, he was walking out of the ring with a choked-up thank you, his face as red as a tomato. There were murmurs throughout the class at this small interaction, although Naruto ignored the stares easily. After all, I've been doing it for as long as I can remember. 3 fights later, 2 of them had been dominated by the heirs of the main clan. Although the heir Nara was about to surrender at the beginning of their encounter, before Iruka reminded him that he would have informed his mother of the result. Naruto wondered if this class was completely against the civilians, who made up 2/3 of his group, since the clans had a clear advantage when it came to outside help. Then Iruka mentioned his name, and his attention returned to the scar Chunin. Yes, Iruka-sensei. Iruka sighed before repeating it. The 5th match, Naruto Uzumaki against Kiba and Nuzuka, is what I said if you had been listening to me. Nodding to himself, as much as nodding to Iruka's statement, Naruto jumped up firm where he had been sitting, thinking, and went back to the rink. His opponent, a burly, wild-looking boy, had been accompanied everywhere by his dog. According to what Kage had told him, the Inuzuka were very proficient in taijutsu, especially with the techniques of their clan and their co-workers. Although he lacked both, Kiba was not to be underestimated, as he jumped forward as soon as Iruka began the combat, showing his teeth and with his nails elongated, almost like ready claws. Naruto started defensively, blocking the boy's sweeping attacks with his hands and dodging the powerful kicks that, evidently, they were looking to open up their defenses so that the clawed attacks would take effect. If it wasn't for the fact that Kage had trained him very vigorously in taijutsu and endurance techniques throughout the training trip, Naruto knew that he would probably have been overwhelmed by the furious assault. But instead, he felt comfortable with his movements, deflecting them until an opening appeared in Kiba's defenses, which Naruto took advantage of a powerful palm strike that sent Kiba backward, gasping and clutching his stomach with one hand for a moment, before recovering and taking a stance once more. The next attack was more cautious, and the two guys exchanged blows for the next 30 seconds. Kiba's resistance was beginning to falter as Naruto dealt one blow after another on the boy's guard, forcing him to retreat step by step. Naruto increased the intensity as Kiba approached the edge of the taijutsu ring in his attempt to gain distance between the two fighters. With Kiba barely 2 steps away from the edge, Naruto suddenly changed tactics, bending down and throwing a strong kick. He hit the boy in the abdomen with a devastating kick that lifted him up through the air and pulled him out of the rink, falling to the ground with a loud thump. There was a moment of silence before this result, and Naruto knew that the most surprised were the Chunin. His academy report from his first 2 years told that he was terrible at taijutsu. But he had just destroyed one of the clan members, taijutsu specialist of the class, without even getting disheveled. The best thing for Naruto was that he had not even been forced to use the Uzumaki style, limiting himself to the punches, kicks and general stops that Kage had taught him as a precursor to the real style, which means that there was revealed nothing but some of his speed, strength and endurance, which was not very informative for anyone who did not know him well. After finally coming out of the collective stupor, Iruka spoke as he rushed to check on the fallen boy. Winner by eviction from the rink, Naruto Uzumaki, Mizuki, continue the session from here. I have to take Kiba to the infirmary to be treated. He might have broken a couple of ribs on landing. Without saying anything else, he activated a Shushin and disappeared from the training ground. Mizuki stepped forward and picked up Iruka's clipboard, which he had dropped, looking at the assigned pairs, while dismissing Naruto from the rink with a dismissive gesture. After remembering that if he had hurt his companion so much, Naruto would contain himself more in the future, Naruto exited the rink and returned to his original position to the side. Unsurprisingly, he was respectfully ignored by the rest of the class after that demonstration, and a Kage lesson came to mind. It is good that both your allies and your enemies respect your power. That brings peace, but only your enemies should fear your power, lest your allies end up turning against you because of that fear. With that suddenly echoing in his head, Naruto interpreted it as a sign that he had probably overreacted with his new image, and that perhaps making an effort to get to know his peers wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. The problem was that, with the record that had been set, changing it suddenly would be very difficult to achieve in the short term. He kept thinking about the matter while the remaining battles were going on, with all the heirs of the clan winning comfortably, and the battles between civilians much closer in comparison. The only surprise was Sakura's match against one of the girls she had been glaring at. With a perfect taijutsu and amazing flexibility, Sakura pinned her opponent down quite painfully in less than a minute, before getting up in shame and apologizing quietly before leaving the arena too. Sitting alone again, under the cold gaze of those who, obviously, were the defeated friends. Something was happening there that Naruto missed, that was for sure, although he wished to avoid trying to be friends with Sakura to begin with, in case she took it as a sign that he hadn't lost his crush on her and tried to going back to his old way of treating him, something Naruto would definitely not tolerate this time. The bell rang, signaling the end of the day, and Naruto took the opportunity to leave immediately, heading to the training ground that, for all he knew, had been disused for some time, or so he had discovered. While using it until now, I needed to think more about how to change his attitude to be able to make friends with at least some of his classmates. When jumping, Naruto did not notice the eyes that were watching him intently since he won his match. Consumption Stealth, the owner of those eyes, jumped on the roof after Naruto, determined to return the dobe to the place where he had been before her mysterious disappearance for 2 years. His onyx-colored eyes glowed with determination and anger as the figure followed him at a prudent distance. Upon arriving at the training camp, Naruto started. Previously on Shades of Yuzu. When jumping, Naruto did not notice the eyes that were watching him intently since he won his match. Consumption Stealth, the owner of those eyes, jumped on the roof after Naruto, determined to return the dobe to the place where he had been before his mysterious disappearance for 2 years. His onyx-colored eyes glowed with determination and anger as the figure followed him at a prudent distance. Upon arriving at the training camp, Naruto started with some basic exercises before adopting the meditation pose. That cage had taught him to calm his chakra, which was quite upset. Taking a deep breath and clearing his mind, he was about to relax when he heard someone moving at the edge of the clearing where he was. Sharpening his ear, he noticed a familiar smell and frowned as he screamed with irritation. "What are you doing here, Yuki-san?" Chapter 6, Confrontation, and after a few moments without response, Naruto was tempted to stand up. Mainly to teach the boy manners, before hearing the inhalation and the quick movement that could only be associated with a technique. Jumping to the side, wide-eyed and furious, Naruto proved to be right an instant later, when the place where he had been sitting burst into flames. Staring at the dark-haired boy as he descended from the trees, Naruto growled his question as he adopted the first Uzumaki-style stance. A defensive one designed to expose the enemy to counterattacks with blockages and detours. "What the hell, Uchiha? I ask you a simple question and you try to attack me. What a bad psychopath." For a second, Naruto thought he wouldn't get an answer and braced himself before Uchiha finally spoke. "I'll tell you why if you beat me." And with that, he darted forward, covering the distance with surprising rapidity. Naruto was on the defensive, that was clear from the first exchanges. Although he was not as strong as Kiba, Sasuke made up for it with speed and skill. His taijutsu was very advanced and unknown to Naruto, probably a much more advanced version of the blade style than some chunin that she adored him had taught her. He was very compact, and Sasuke didn't leave any openings as he pressed his attacks further and faster against Naruto's defenses. After a couple of minutes, Sasuke jumped back, seemingly more angry at Naruto than at first. "Why don't you fight?" the boy roared, before throwing to Tsunade with his left hand, running forward with two more prepared on the right. Naruto caught the first projectile and used it to deflect the second with a twist, facing his opponent again. Just in time to dodge the first cuts with the two kunai. Landing another kunai, Naruto adopted a more balanced style than the first one. And both of them threw punches back and forth for a minute. It was Sasuke who made the first mistake, visibly furious at the situation. One of his punches with his left arm extended too far, allowing Naruto to disarm his sword with that hand, before flipping Uchiha over with that hand on his back. Getting ahead of Uchiha, Naruto stomped on her right wrist, which made her let go of the other crib, and with a scream. At the same time, Naruto directed one of his cribs at him and at his neck, leaving him paralyzed, with the fear reflected on his face. Breathing heavily after the best fight he had ever had with someone other than Kage, Naruto was still talking angrily to the one who had attacked him, almost tempted to activate the Kage clan technique that he had been taught. The mask of the shadows, just to increase the effect. "Now that I have your undivided attention, I'll ask you again, you little psycho, why did you attack me for no reason at all? And answer quickly, lest I lose patience. That won't end well for you." That provoked a reaction, and the Uchiha growled at him. "You wouldn't dare, I'm the Uchiha," he interrupted as Naruto's sword slightly slit his throat. Something in his eyes started to change and glow red as Naruto responded with his most intimidating tone. "Try me, it would make my day, possibly my week. If I wanted to, no one would find your body." It was a calculated bluff on Naruto's part. He was just trying to knock the kid out and present him to the court accused of attempted murder. But if the kid thought he was serious about the body, that was his problem. Counting down from 5, Naruto couldn't help but smile when after 3 seconds Sasuke shouted at him in a rather feminine voice to stop. Although he guessed that it could well be the stress of the situation that had caused it. He pulled back his crib and stepped back, leaving Sasuke rubbing his throat carefully with his good hand. After a moment, Sasuke spoke, in his usual hoarse voice. "I wanted to know if today's combat with Kiba had been a fluke, or if the rumors that you had been kidnapped by a night demon and trained to possess a terrible power were true. Since you are no longer the W were before you left." The boy stopped talking, but the hint was obvious. Naruto laughed to himself. Kage would love to have earned the nickname Night Demon, in addition to all his other titles. "So that's your defense for trying to kill me? You wanted to know if I had become much stronger." Sasuke shook his head, before Naruto could reprimand him for his stupidity. If you had looked like you weren't going to move, I would have shot the fireball somewhere else. I'm not that stupid. The other reason was that you proved to be a real challenge. You don't hold back like everyone else, not wanting to hurt your precious Uchiha. I thought that if I fought against you, maybe I would get the lineage of my clan, which supposedly only wakes up in life and death situations. Looking at the boy's red eyes, each with a Tamo present forming part of the iris, Naruto had to admit that Lucia's surprisingly passionate speech made a lot of sense, especially since it seemed to have worked. Although he struggled, he didn't seem to have realized. Putting away one of his kunai, Naruto grabbed the small pocket mirror that Kage had insisted on carrying to look around corners without exposing himself to detection. He offered it to Lucia and spoke with much more joy than before. Well, then you owe me a double. One for not having planned to report this attack, and the other, a favor. Well, you'd better see for yourself. Looking at Naruto with confusion, obviously not understanding what he meant, Sasuke grabbed the mirror and observed him for an instant, before an obvious understanding was reflected on his face and a smile will be drawn on it. If Naruto hadn't expected the attack in response to this revelation, he wasn't sure he would have reacted in time to stop it. Sasuke was even faster now, and seemed bent on getting revenge on Naruto for his previous defeat. Naruto backed up step by step, pushed to the limit, while Sasuke seemed able to predict what he was about to do before he did it. He had already received 2 blows to the chest and a kick to the face, one of which had left his lip slightly bleeding. And that was before Sasuke returned to his idea of using 2 kunai. Knowing that he would not be able to defend himself properly with kunai alone, Naruto took advantage of the momentary pause in Sasuke's attack generated by searching for his bag to jump back and bring his hand to his sword. Kage was a short sword user, but he mastered most of the weapons that were considered easy to find in the elemental nations. Therefore, he had Naruto practice with several weapons to find out which one he felt most comfortable with, before training him mainly on that weapon. The result was the nodachi she was wearing tied around her waist. It was not a complete nodachi, shortened to fit Naruto's size and build, but the concepts behind its use were the same. Thus, Naruto concentrated on the first of the techniques that Kage had taught him, the only one in which Kage claimed to be acceptable. The lion's roar was a simple unsheathing technique that required great speed and a slight chakra boost. As Sasuke charged forward, Naruto unsheathed his sword with all possible speed, slashing first up and then down with a fluid motion, stepping forward to extend the reach of the second strike. His speed was such that his own eyes could barely follow the blurred vision, and he knew, where was I going? Somehow, Sasuke picked up the technique despite his speed and tried to dodge the punches. He managed to avoid the first blow completely, although the second one went through his shirt and left a slight cut on his torso. Sasuke finished jumping backwards while Naruto sheathed his sword once again, hoping that the demonstration would have brought him back to reality. However, his thoughts stopped when the breeze from the area picked up, moving Sasuke's shirt on both sides of his body, leaving Naruto staring in amazement at what was in front of him. Sasuke seemed ready to continue when it was given. He noticed that Naruto was staring at him blankly. Following Naruto's gaze, Sasuke immediately released his Tsukune and tried to close his t-shirt and protect himself from Naruto's gaze, with a cry of surprise and embarrassment, almost typical of a girl. However, the damage was already done, as demonstrated by Naruto's shocked exclamation a moment later. "Sasuke, why the hell do you have breasts?" Thus, Naruto concentrated on the first of the techniques that Kage had taught him, the only one in which Kage claimed to be acceptable. The lion's roar was a simple unsheathing technique, which required great speed and a slight chakra boost. As Sasuke charged forward, Naruto unsheathed his sword with all possible speed, slashing first up and then down with a fluid motion, stepping forward to extend the reach of the second strike. His speed was such that his own eyes could barely follow the blurred vision, and he knew where he was going. Somehow, Sasuke picked up the technique despite his speed and tried to dodge the punches. He managed to avoid the first blow completely, although the second one went through his shirt and left a slight cut on his torso. Sasuke finished jumping backwards as Naruto sheathed his sword once more, hoping that the demonstration had brought him back to reality. However, his thoughts stopped when the breeze from the area picked up, moving Sasuke's shirt on both sides of his body, leaving Naruto staring in amazement. What he had in front of him. Sasuke seemed ready to continue when he noticed Naruto staring blankly at him. Following Naruto's gaze, Sasuke immediately released his Tsukune and tried to close his t-shirt and protect himself from Naruto's gaze, with a cry of surprise and embarrassment, and typical of a girl. However, the damage was already done, as demonstrated by Naruto's shocked exclamation a moment later. "Sasuke, why the hell do you have breasts?" Revelations of an unexpected kind. Naruto was silent after his exclamation, leaving them both silent for a moment, blushing for different reasons. Sasuke finally replied, spitting out fury. "I thought the answer would be obvious, even to you, Tobe," he interrupted himself as if realizing something. As Naruto suggested what the boy meant. "You mean you're one of those weird boy girls that Iruka-sensei was teaching us about, an Emma?" While Naruto was silent, trying to remember the word that Iruka had used, Sasuke sputtered in embarrassment before yelling at him. "I'm not one of those things, I'm completely a woman, thank you very much." Sasuke then seemed to realize what he had said by shutting up with a soft pie, leaving Naruto trying the same thing he had just discovered. "But why are you hiding that you're a girl?" As he said that, Naruto remembered what he had heard a few days after his return, just before he started at the academy. Flashback scene. Jumping from roof to roof, trying to get acquainted with the village again. Naruto stopped when he saw a small crowd forming in one of the squares. As he jumped down, he was disappointed to discover that he was simply the Uchiha going about his daily chores, with groups of girls discreetly following him. Just as he was about to jump again, he heard a man remark to his wife, "I am very glad that our daughter is not interested in him. Dear, that is, not only is he under the threat that his brother will return to finish the job, but in a few years, the council will start demanding that he recover. He builds his clan, and the Okage has a limit to prevent them from choosing marriages and girls to be with. If he doesn't find any by then. Although I guess it could be worse, at least he's a man." By that time, Naruto had lost interest and left, back to his exploration. End of the flashback. Understanding touched him like a brick, and he gasped before recovering. Before saying anything else, he unbuttoned the black jacket Kage had bought for him and offered it to Sasuke, whose expression quickly changed from rage to confusion. After a moment of nothing happening, Naruto spoke to clarify his action. "You can wear this, it'll be better for both of us if we talk, while you're not trying to cover up." Understanding showed on his face, and he took a step forward. Naruto looked away as she took it with a whisper of thanks. After a moment's pause, Sasuke spoke again. "I guess I'm in the terrible situation of being indebted to you now, Naruto-san, assuming you don't tell them my secret." When Naruto started to turn his head to answer, he found her hands holding his head. "I need you to answer a few more questions before I let you go around Naruto-san again, to find out if I can trust you." Naruto shrugged his shoulders, a surprisingly difficult action with a still head. "Whatever you say, Sasuke, what's wrong with the san all of a sudden?" There was a tinge of resignation in his reply. "I hope that if I show you a little more respect, it will help you decide to help me, but I can go back to Dobe if you prefer." "Naruto-san. Now answer the question. Will you keep my secret?" Well, that was a pretty easy question to answer, so he answered without hesitation. "Of course I do, Sasuke-chan. I know why you're hiding now, and I wouldn't wish on anyone what would happen if you were found out, not even the idiot of the academy janitor." A giggle was heard, something that seemed so out of place in Naruto's mind with the Sasuke, he knew that it was disconcerting. At least we can agree on that. Period. My next question is, what do you want to change from your silence? That stumped him for a moment. What the hell was I talking about? Then he remembered a bad point he had mentioned during his diplomacy lessons. Everyone expects something for doing nothing. Ninjas expect a lot not to divulge secrets they know. It all comes down to the price both parties pay for revealing the secret they possess. With this in mind, Naruto decided that staying honest was the best tactic. "Honestly, I don't want anything from you. I found out something, and it's important. Keep it a secret. Otherwise, you will get into a good mess, and in a very difficult situation. I hope the same if someone finds out one of my secrets." That obviously surprised her, and he felt the hands holding his head pull back before grabbing him by the shoulders and turning him to face her, with the eyes on and the Sharingan spinning. "Really? I'll know if you're lying. It's one of the things the Sharingan helps me spot." He nodded vigorously. "Of course I do. What could you give me that I want?" That provoked another look of disbelief in the girl, a disbelief that spread to your answer. Apart from being the only heiress of a powerful and prestigious clan, whose coffers are still decently filled with the income from the shops that rent to me, I am amazed at the lack of possibilities you have in this situation. Well, it was official. Regardless of your gender, Sasuke. He had a way of making Naruto feel completely dumb, something he liked to think wasn't that easy. He arched an eyebrow inquisitively. "Would it be easier for you to accept if I asked you for something? Because if this takes much longer, we'll probably get into trouble with the Ambuco patrols when we try to come home." At that moment, she blushed and quickly released him. "You're right. I should be grateful to you for your generosity, but here I'm trying to force you to accept something. I won't try it again, I swear, but I have a question. Would you grant it to me?" After being attacked, yelled at, attacked again and then interrogated, being asked a question was a relief for Naruto. "Of course, Sasuke-chan, as long as it's not too ridiculous," chuckled once more before walking away from him. "First, my name is Saki, not Sasuke, and second, how? I am the only person of our generation who knows the truth about me. I need your opinion." He moved his hands, but since his back was to him, Naruto couldn't understand what he was doing before he turned around again, with a light and funny tone. "My haircut makes me less attractive like that. It should take..." For the longest time, Naruto struggled to stay conscious while watching Saki. Obviously, he had dispelled some technique, but his face had changed. The changes were not great in themselves. His cheekbones a little higher, his jaw less defined, his face in general a little narrower, but by combining them, you seemed to be seeing someone else. In addition, her hair, which was previously slightly up and to the sides, now fell flat, leaving her with a very attractive face, and hair that covered her ears but not beyond, in a surprisingly flattering look. She laughed again, and the smile changed her face even more. If someone had told him that this girl was the real Sasuke, he would have told him that he was crazy. "I didn't think it was possible to leave your mouth open, Naruto-san. I thought it came naturally to you." The insult was obviously a joke. So Naruto managed not to overreact, which was probably what she wanted at that moment. Instead, he turned his gaze to something else. "I guess you dissipated some technique by turning around, but the chakra expenditure would be too much for you to keep it all day. So I guess some kind of sign." His insight surprised her, that was obvious, but she nodded, and then unbuttoned the top of his jacket, revealing a seal that he had on his shoulders, on the front of his torso. Naruto tried to cover his eyes, but stopped when she yelled at him, "Don't bother, it's nothing, no. You haven't watched already, so there's no point in feeling embarrassed after your little drooling session earlier." She blushed, it was true. The image of Sasuke's small but growing chest was firmly ingrained in his mind, and he doubted he could take it off for quite a while. Not that he wanted to do though. Lowering his hand, he approached and began to observe the seal carefully, marveling at its complexity. Cage had only covered the basics of stamping, being an amateur who could only create the most basic stamps he needed. But he had told Naruto that the Uzumaki were famous for their skill to seal, and thus began Naruto's fascination with the subject. Drawing a line that he believed connected two of the important functions, that of loading and that of storage. He noticed that Saki shuddered slightly, and not only because of his pact. Darkness was fast approaching, and with the clear sky, typical of summer nights in Konoha, the temperature would drop quickly. With a sigh, she stepped back, grabbed the zipper of her jacket, and pulled it up, covering Saki once more. Although she kept protesting, saying that she could do it alone. "As much as I'd love to find out how that stamp works, and all its secrets, it's getting late. And you'd better get back quick before the Zambas show up en masse. The last thing we want is for them to find you like this." She nodded, but seemed a little worried. The problem is that the seal needs more time to load before you can activate it from new. And if I use an eng, they might detect it and think I'm a possible infiltrator, which is even worse. Naruto smiled reassuringly at him before taking his hand. Don't worry about that, Saki-chan. I have a technique that will allow us to enter the Uchiha complex. I just need you to hold me tight and close your eyes. You really don't want them to open up to you with this. She stared at him for a moment before sighing and reaching out to hug him. This better not be an excuse for you to touch me or you'll regret it, I swear. With the threat, she closed her eyes and leaned her head on his shoulder with a grimace. Deciding not to wait a second so she wouldn't think he was trying to get aroused, he held his hands up behind her back, forming one seal after another with meticulous precision. The technique was another one of Cage's, and although useful, it was one of the most chakra-consuming techniques for the masked man. It worked by throwing the user, and everyone and everything that was attached to him, into a parallel dimension, composed essentially of shadows and fire. Then he would bring them back to the place Naruto had been thinking about, one of the courtyards of the Uchiha complex, that he had seen while exploring. The technique was very fluid, although it required an enormous amount of energy, both to transport the mass of the user, and whoever was with him, and to erect a chakra shield around him to deter the inhabitants of the alternate realm of trying to eat them. After a few moments without him moving, Naruto realized that Saki probably hadn't noticed that they had moved. Looking down, he was surprised to see a relatively gentle smile on the girl's face. And, reluctant to break it, he knew it was better to get it inside before a patrol car passed by. Saki-chan, you can open your eyes now, we're here. She opened them slowly, before realizing he was looking at her. She jumped away, her cheeks flushed, even as she resumed a neutral expression. Having done this, he looked around and realized that he was right and that they had moved. He turned to Naruto, watching him with an appraising gaze that sent a slight shiver down his spine. Awesome technique, Naruto-san. You know you're going to teach me that technique one way or another. Naruto shook his head. I'm afraid I can't do that, Saki-chan. I promised my teacher that I would only teach these techniques to my family. After all, they are all that's left of my village. Well, instead of discouraging her, that line of defense seemed to excite her even more, judging by the predatory smile. She mumbled something he didn't catch before turning around and pointing. But enough about the technique for now, I'm sure we can negotiate it later. My house is around here, and I would like you to join me before you leave. Deciding to joke around a bit at that moment, Naruto spoke in a mocking tone as he walked beside her. Surprised when she slipped her hand into his gently before squeezing it slightly. Cool, how sweet is Aki-chan, with this and your expression from earlier when arriving, anyone could think that you liked him. He stopped when he saw that she was giving him a look that promised pain if he kept talking about the subject, and wisely put her aside before getting into more trouble. So they walked through the district in silence, going through well-kept gardens and streets, before approaching a large three-story house on the edge of the complex, near one of the gates leading to the rest of Konoha. This is where I live now? It used to be a warehouse that I never entered, so after everything that happened, at least there are no memories that haunt me. Not knowing what other reaction, Naruto settled for a reassuring smile as he squeezed her hand to reassure her. A Sasuke with feelings would take some getting used to, but he was better than the Sasuke from before, that's for sure. Well, Saki-chan, you know where I am, and my door is always open if you need me. But if I do or say something stupid, will you kill me fast, please? He asked, smiling again with surprise as he teased. Don't count on it, Tobe. I'll torture you all I want, and you won't complain in the slightest. She paused before looking at him seriously again. But seriously, thank you, Naruto, not only for keeping the secret from me. It's refreshing to finally have someone my age to talk to, even if he's a stinky kid. Obviously, he said the latter in jest, but he still pretended to be offended in an exaggerated way. So what? What a bad smell. The good lady me here with her words. She laughed, another thing he would have to adjust to, before squeezing her hand one last time and turning towards the door. He turned the key he took out of his bag and opened the door while screaming once more. Good night, Naruto. See you tomorrow at the same training camp after the academy. You have already proved to be more useful than those buffoons who claim to be our teachers." With that said, he left, leaving Naruto alone in the courtyard, his mind still in a whirl. From the enormous amount of information he had assimilated in the last few hours. Finally determined to return home, he assumed that there was something good in the evening. At least, he had become friends with one of his classmates, even if he was not allowed to tell anyone about it. Previously in Yuzu's shadow, he turned the key he took out of his bag and opened the door, while shouting once more, "Good night, Naruto. See you tomorrow at the same training camp after the academy. You have already proved to be more useful than those buffoons who claim to be our teachers." With that said, he left, leaving Naruto alone in the courtyard, his mind still in a whirl. From the enormous amount of information he had roasted, similar in the last few hours. Finally determined to return home, he assumed that there was something good in the evening. At least, he had become friends with one of his classmates, even if he was not allowed to tell anyone about it. Chapter 8. A Progress of a Kind. The next week passed relatively quickly for Naruto, developing a slow routine as he went along. After the surprise with Saki, he had decided not to try to make friends with another person in his class, until he had resolved his stance regarding the girl in disguise. He also had a new project to work on, since after the first night they had spent training together. Using only taijutsu, of course, for now, although Saki had shown interest in learning how to use a sword as Naruto, I had asked him to take another look at his stamp so I could copy it. She sounds smugly before asking him if he was just trying to undress her again, leaving him red with excitement before agreeing to show him. He ran the top of his t-shirt so that he could see it, and, grabbing parchment and pen, he set to work tracing the lines and scribbles that formed the seal in front of him. It had taken him half an hour to copy it to his satisfaction, and afterwards Saki had insisted that he owed her his patience regarding that little session, something he had recognized quite easily. She hadn't claimed that favor yet, though he was sure she still had something on her mind. It was like her not to tell him what she had planned. The seal had taken up most of Naruto's free time when he wasn't with Sasuke or training alone. And he still had no idea how it worked, most of it without destroying Saki's chakra system. He had gone to the shinobi library after asking the Hokage about stamps, and for him to point him in that direction. Although the books he could borrow were borrowed. States as a non-girl were of little help to her beyond teaching her the rules of sealing, something that Kage did not know at all. Speaking of Kage, he had received a letter from the man through the courier service that operated through the elemental nations. He thought that the girl he had found was actually an Uzumaki, but she was also a herb genin, and seemed to have a sensor, as she could detect his presence, even when using her shadow techniques, and according to her, her chakra. It was too dark to be reliable, whatever that meant. Obviously, she had also informed her superiors, since after the first 2 attempts at contact, they had put her under surveillance. Kage had said that she would make one more attempt before returning to Konoha, with the idea of taking Naruto during Christmas to the grass, hoping that Naruto would have more luck talking to her. Although he was not opposed to the idea, Naruto knew that it would be fun to persuade the Hokage to allow them to travel from Konoha, since he had just returned. But for now, everything was just a hypothesis. Coming back to reality, he looked up from his work to observe Saki, who was lying on the grass near him, reading her book, which, according to her, belonged to a series that her mother liked in life. She obviously enjoyed it too, as after the day's training was over she asked if she could sit with her while she read, something she didn't mind, as she was just going to work on the stamp one more time, so the location no. It didn't matter too much. He now had more than a dozen copies of the stamp, all of them, except the original, covered with his drawings and doodles. She smiled as she read something in the book, before staring at him, staring into his eyes. Neither of them flinched for an instant, although Saki's smile didn't fade in the slightest. After a moment, he looked away and tried to put the situation behind him with a question. Naruto-kun, I know you disappeared for 2 years, and you obviously trained with a master during that time. Do you think he could teach me something? He paused and quickly continued, before Naruto could say anything. Nothing related to your clan or anything, but with my brother out there, I need to get stronger a lot faster, if I want to beat him when the time comes. During the last week, They had tentatively talked about Saki's brother and, of course, about the massacre he had caused. Saki revealed that she still received monthly advice from Hino's father on the subject, but it didn't seem to help her at all. Obviously, revealing such a weakness to her made her vulnerable, so Naruto did his best to make her not think that she could take advantage of it at some point. However, the whole conversation seemed to have helped, since now she could talk about her brother with Baghdad without suffering the old flashbacks. Although they still caught her at the most unexpected moments, paralyzed when hearing a child's laughter or seeing a pattern of leaves on the ground. Naruto liked to think he was helping her through it, but with how shattered she was after each event, he wondered if trying to get her to open up was making the situation better or worse. He decided to tear her from his memories with good news. In the worst case, he would have to put pressure on Cage to do it, but he doubted that he would have to go that far. Of course, he will be able to teach you some things, especially if you still want to use a sword. My only warning would be that you'd have to tell her. He shook himself for a moment before shrugging. I expected it already, and besides, if he keeps training you when he comes back, I won't be left behind if he trains me too. Naruto didn't make any comment, but they both understood that that was the real reason why Saki wished to train with Cage. With the amount of his fans among the shinobi population, it wouldn't have been difficult for him to receive training from them. But he would have to do it as Sasuke, a personality who had finally managed to admit that he didn't enjoy following, even if it would make things easier in the village. He nodded slowly before picking up his work. It was getting dark, and I still had to take Saki home. Standing up, she heard Saki imitate her with a sigh of disappointment. She had long since stopped pretending that she disliked having to be with him, although she still sometimes complained in jokes. After putting her work away, she turned to see Saki advancing, slowly hugging him. As he activated his shadow teleportation technique again, appearing at the entrance of Saki's renovated house. As Naruto tried to pull away, Saki looked at him while hugging him again. Her silent plea made him sigh, feigning distress before returning her hug. They stayed like that for a minute, before finally she turned away smiling at him. Naruto-kun, I have a request to make to you. By saying it, he drew him inside the house, so he assumed it couldn't be that serious. 2-week time jump. That small request paved the way for Naruto's transition to the Uchiha house 3 nights a week. Saki had asked him to stay in the guest room, which was next to hers and connected, for a private bathroom. The reason for this request quickly became apparent. After Naruto reluctantly agreed and returned home to get some bedding, the two stayed up by the fire in the living room, drinking hot chocolate and chatting quietly until Saki fell asleep on his shoulder. With a firm smile on his face, he just sat there for a while, enjoying the presence of someone his age who was completely comfortable with his presence. Finally, he got up and took the girl to his bed, tucking her in before returning to his temporary room. He had barely been asleep for an hour when he heard the screams and cries from the next room. She ran through the bathroom, katana in hand, and found Saki in a nightmare, tossing and turning on the bed, screaming unintelligibly at someone. When he woke her up, she realized who he was before throwing herself on him crying pitifully. It turned out that he had nightmares every other night, and that after them he would not be able to sleep anymore that night. She hoped that Naruto's presence nearby would help her, but it didn't seem to take effect. So they talked some more, and Saki revealed that she hadn't even told Hino's father anything about the nightmares, thinking that they made her look even weaker than she already was. Naruto comforted her for a while longer and, without her noticing, she fell asleep in his arms again. With no other way out but for the girl to wake up, he resigned himself to her hitting him in the morning, and fell asleep. The two woke up to Saki's alarm clock, which announced the academy, without having moved at all during the night. This was all Saki needed to prove to herself that Naruto was a painkiller for her nightmares, and therefore asked him to stay with her from now on. Naruto eventually came to an agreement with her staying every night, arguing that, once they graduated, she might not be available every night, and that they had to try to help Saki get over it herself. According to Saki, it was having some effect. The nightmares were less frequent, even when he was away, and sometimes he could fall back asleep when he woke up. The other reason Naruto argued this was that he knew that Kage would take him out of the village for the next year. At least once, if not several, and that, at first, he would not let Saki travel with them. It is not that the Hokage allowed to such valuable goals to come out of the village without supervision. Although that wouldn't be for a while, it seemed, judging by the coded information Kage had put in his last letter to Naruto, which he had received the day he didn't make any progress. With regard to the Genin Kusa, Kage had turned his attention to the rumors of a group of slaveholders who claimed to be able to give their clients lineage users of various varieties, one of whom sounded like he might belong to Walpal's sister clan, the appropriately named Oni clan, who could summon and control various small and minor demons to serve them in battle and in missions. With this news, it was clear to Naruto that he would have to perform an original training on his own while Kage was busy, since he had almost completed all the exercises that he had left for him when they separated at the border of the Country of Fire. I was sure I could ask Lokai, a man with his experience no doubt. It might help him with some of the things he was struggling with. But for now, he decided to think about that idea later. The academy bell announcing the end of the day had just rung, and seeing Sasuke disappear from his seat and walk through the door made it clear that Saki wanted to start training as soon as possible. The reason for this was probably the discussion of the day, which happened to be about the prominent clans of the village, and which obviously included a talk about the Uchiha clan. Several of her fans had spent the session cooing to her alter ego about the tragedy of her family having disappeared, something that had led to Lucia about to berate them for their lack of tact. But he didn't have much to worry about in that regard. Saki would make her way to the resort while getting rid of her pursuers and fans. She would transform into her female form when she was conveniently hidden from prying eyes, and then he would then head to the training camp that they had practically claimed as their own, far away from the village, where anyone who wasn't a ninja could come to Osmir. So, even with his initial advantage in the race to the meeting point, it would take almost an hour to reach the training ground in question. More than enough time for her to calm down a bit before he trained with her. That's what I was hoping for anyway. The girl was now as fast as him without using her Sharingan, and as such, she could hurt him quite a bit when she was angry. He also felt very little guilt for the damage he did to her firm, having discovered his healing ability, claiming that he was helping his ability improve after all, which was always a good thing. He suspected that the reason was, in fact, that she still wanted to make sure that he did not consider her weak in any way, although she wished that he would not feel the need of breaking his nose every chance he got in a workout to prove it. With time in his favor, he spent 10 minutes watching the rest of his class slowly disappear into the usual bustle of Konoha, typical of the main village, before leaving for the training ground at a slow trot and jumping through the rooftops, which would allow him to think while moving without much risk of bumping into something by accident and embarrassing himself, as he had seen several Sasuke fans do while trying to chase the boy on the way home. What Naruto didn't know is that, for once, he was the one being followed on the way to the training camp. His relaxed senses and attitude weakened the sixth sense that Kage had tried to instill in him, and made him oblivious to the threat that was stalking him. Chapter 9. Something you should know. Sakura was having a bad week, if not a bad month, being honest with herself. Since the new kid's arrival at the school at the beginning of the year, she had hoped to earn his support, but his attitude, as well as what he had done to Kiva, had given her more than enough reasons to be more cautious in her approach to. Instead of just walking up to him and seeing if he remembered her, especially after having a crib thrown at him, and accidentally by showing up in her class. It was certainly hard to remember the annoying but cheerful blonde who had fawned over her when they were younger, when she looked back around a fireplace she had hidden behind, when the boy in the black cape, whom she followed. He looked around almost cautiously once more, before heading to what she obviously thought was a quiet place. The reason she was following him was a bit selfish if she was honest with herself. While the academy had started well for her, getting high scores in the tryouts and being selected to be part of the senior class in her year of the academy, while increasing her chances of being placed on a strong Genin team when she graduated, she also found that many of her friends from preschool were jealous of her. Now, not only because of the extra training and special teaching she received as part of the class, but they also resented her for being able to brag at their meetings that I could talk and train with the most attractive guys in the class, like Kiba and, of course, Sasuke. Over time, they began to be more cruel to her in their chats, and it soon became clear that she was not welcome back in their group of friends. It would have been fine with Sakura, because she had known for a long time that children could be fickle about such things. If she hadn't already fallen out with her best friend in class, Hino Yamanaka, over a stupid competition to try to get the Uchiha. So there I was, a year and a half at the academy with the best female score in the theory exams, and suddenly, friendless and alone. Both at school and outside it, I wasn't much better. She hid it well from her family, as they would only worry and put even more pressure on her. That's why he followed his classmate as he did now, mainly to avoid having to go home too early and end up in front of his parents. That he had been with friends. The other reason was more of a hopeful wish than anything else. She had to admit that she was disturbed by the idea that she was following him so that he would catch her. As long as he didn't react brusquely, it would give her the perfect opportunity to talk to him. Away from everyone trying to dissuade him from befriending the big-headed geek, as he had recently heard her call some of his old friends. It would certainly be nice to talk to someone again as a close friend. Jumping back up to try and keep up with Naruto, I found them jumping towards the end. North of Konoha, far beyond where he had been in his whole life, heading to the right staircase of Okage Mountain, and entering the training camps that made up that area of Konoha. As she passed through some of the closest training areas, Sakura found it increasingly difficult to maintain herself. He hid while Naruto was passing by, and I was almost sure that he already knew that someone was following him. But they reached their apparent destination without incident, and Naruto was standing in the wide clearing, pacing and doing some basic exercises, while Sakura quietly watched from the side. Normally he would leave at that time. I'd been following people long enough to know that getting caught watching them train was worse than just while traveling. But something about the exercises I did, the way they flowed so fluidly from one posture to another, with Naruto seemingly struggling, captivated her in a way that attracted her. She was about to risk everything, get out of where she was hiding, and run to him, damn the consequences. When she felt someone grab her tightly and hold her right arm behind her back. He was about to force himself and try to scream for help when he felt something cold and sharp against her neck, which paralyzed her, not daring even to breathe. Naruto continued with his exercises, oblivious to his plight, while she and the one who wanted to hold her remained silent for a moment before she plucked up the courage to try to speak. "Please, I didn't mean to hurt you." He was interrupted with a groan of pain as he saw his arm being painfully twisted a little further back. But Naruto's head went towards where they were, getting stiff before disappearing in an instant. Sakura wasn't sure if she should be relieved or more worried when Naruto spoke behind her back, and the arm wrench loosened slightly. "Do you know? When I texted you saying I was being followed and we needed a plan, that wasn't exactly what I meant." There was silence, except for the slight movement of the figure holding her, before Naruto spoke, this time more insistently. "No, let her go, don't make me take you away from her. We will give you the opportunity to explain yourself first of all, and definitely no crib, and on the neck with one of my classmates. That is totally forbidden, even if she tried to throw a crib at me and on the first day of school." That made Sakura blush, even as the figure let go of her hand and took the crib from her. And as he pushed her forward against the tree she had hidden behind. I knew that would happen at some point. When he turned around, he found himself looking at Naruto, and a girl of his same height, with short black hair, dark eyes, and a short kimono that seemed made for both battle and everyday wear, judging by the ease of movement, and the silence that had invaded them. The girl seemed to be furious, although for some reason she restrained herself so as not to speak. Naruto seemed to sense the tension and stepped forward, smiling politely at Sakura, hoping it was an easy way to diffuse the situation. "Don't worry, Sakura, she's an old friend of mine who's very protective of me, and well, with you sneaking up on me, she's a little nervous." His smile faded a little, and he looked at her earnestly for a moment before continuing. "Now, could you explain to me what you were doing?" Sakura swallowed saliva before bowing her head, hoping it would be perceived as an apology and respect. He could deal with Naruto alone, but it was the protective psychopath that worried him much more. Well, Naruto-san, this is going to be it. To sound a little weird, but please, listen to me. Naruto Uzumaki. Looking at the girl who was dozing in front of him, Naruto couldn't help but shake his head, amused at the story that had just been told to him. As for reasons to stalk, the idea of doing it just to hang out and cheat on your family. It was not something I had ever expected from the girl I remembered from back in the day. An unfeminine growl was heard to her right, where Saki was leaning against a tree, still frowning. I'm glad you think it's funny, Naruto-kun, considering he almost went on the rampage because of your chivalry. If you hadn't been so quick with your nonsense about me being Kai's goddaughter, in charge of taking care of you while he was away, I don't dare to think about the possibilities. What would have happened if I had somehow connected her to Sasuke? Naruto shook his head as he stood up to stretch his muscles. Well, I apologize, Carrie, but it was the best I had at that time, and, to be honest, if we clarify it with the location and the cage, it's a perfect cover. No one would question you for hanging around. That cleared his frown, and he thought about it for a moment before nodding approvingly. Yes, it might be for the best, and then Sakura-chan will stop digging too much in the near future. What are you going to do with her? He decided not to comment on the usual way of addressing Saki despite his apparent dislike for the girl, and instead looked at her with a questioning look that made her shake her head and laugh between your teeth. Don't look at me like that, you idiot. I know you well enough already. I could see how it touched your heart as she told her sad story. He stopped smiling and looked at her incredulously at the hint. You're implying that you're leaving her here and pretending that this never happened. Would you have liked me to do that to you when we had our talk? She flinched, and he was sorry to have mentioned it like that. But his antisocial tendencies were something he needed to help her with sooner or later, and this was as good a time as any. When he spoke again, he did so in a much lower voice, an almost uncertain tremor in his voice. This is nothing like that, and you wouldn't do it, not after all this. He crossed the clearing in an instant, hugging her tightly as she trembled beneath him. He took a few deep breaths and gradually stopped shaking as his head rested on her shoulders. Vaka, don't say such things, you know what happens. He smiled. The formerly insulting term had become almost affectionate lately, and she had to admit that she enjoyed the closeness they now shared. He leaned back slightly to look at her, and she did the same with a small smile. They both stood there for a moment, and then, just when he thought she was leaning forward, he looked away towards the sleeping Sakura. And the smile turned into something almost melancholy. I think you're right, we better get her home soon, or her parents will probably panic and call to the Zombu to look for her. He unraveled with a sigh, but nodded, and went over to pick up the girl carefully. Okay, but unless you know where she lives, we'll have to wake her up to get her to come home. There was silence as he picked her up like a bride, and, as he turned, he saw Saki pull away. The look, slightly flushed. Will you promise not to judge me too much? He nodded as he deciphered the meaning of her question, and began to tie up ends in his head. Although he realized that she was not looking at him, and could not see the movement of her head, and spoke in a low voice. Of course not, Saki-chan, you know I will never judge you. She looked at him gratefully, and nodded slightly. I know where she lives, and yes, before you ask, my feelings for her are more than just platonic. He nodded, walked over and leaned his head against hers, much to her obvious surprise, but it was the only way to physically relax her with the girl in his arms. He smiled reassuringly at her. There's nothing to be ashamed of, Saki. Your heart is your heart after all, and you should never try. He was interrupted when she suddenly leaned over and kissed him directly on the lips. With her eyes closed, as if trying to pour her whole being into the kiss they shared. Honestly, Naruto had to admit that he didn't dislike the new sensation at all. After about 20 seconds, they separated, both blushing and smiling, before Naruto looked down with concern towards Sakura and then looked back at Saki. But Zak, she interrupted him, putting a finger to his lips and smiling radiantly at him. My heart is my heart, and this time, I decided to listen to it. In any case, Your concern for Sakura and me only proves that my feelings are fair. He turned around and jumped to the lowest branch of the tree before turning his head to smile at her again. You're coming, Naruto-kun. And then she got lost in the trees, and Naruto cursed himself out of his daze and rushed to follow her, trying hard not to wake the girl he was holding. The huge smile on his face didn't fade as he remembered what had just happened earlier in Yuzu's shadow. But Zack, she interrupted him, putting a finger to his lips and smiling radiantly at him. My heart is my heart, and this time, I decided to listen to it. If anything, your concern for Sakura and me proves that my feelings are fair. He turned around and jumped to the lowest branch of the tree before turning his head to smile at her again. Are you coming, Naruto-kun? And then she disappeared among the trees. Naruto cursed himself out of his daze and rushed to follow her, trying hard not to wake the girl in his arms. The huge smile on his face did not fade as he remembered what had just happened. Chapter 10. Travels, Problems and Torments. Karakin, you need to adjust your posture, it's too relaxed for this kind of combat. Naruto, you need to dodge more than you do now. Or do you like to get your face smashed every time we train? I thought you just liked that my goddaughter did that to you. Naruto snorted as he got up firm where he had been thrown, wiping off a small trail of blood that was dripping from his mouth before he adopted the first Uzukai-style stance again to face his opponent. Saki moved to stand beside them in her own Uchiha posture, while Kage watched their bruised and bloodied bodies with a faint smile on her scarred face. Then they are going to attack soon, or they are going to try to stay calm the rest of the time. Kage returned to Konoha a week after the Sakura incident and met a new relative and student. The Hokage had officially made him an ally of Konoha, but they were still trying to stay away of the main inhabited areas as much as possible. After all, Kage injured a shinobi on his first visit to Konoha, not to mention the ones he had injured at the bounty station. Kage was a little leery of accepting Saki to train when they met, which led the girl to beg him. In a way, Naruto had never seen her before, even when he had asked for silence about her gender. Kage relaxed seeing that and let her join the training. He found it hilarious that he and Saki would be dating, commenting several times that he never imagined Naruto would end up dating a transvestite. Once they both finished yelling and blushing, he asked her to tell him what happened during his absence. In a clear attempt to change the subject, Naruto quickly summarized the events since his return, doing his best to ignore Kage's laughter at the incident. That revealed to him that Sakura is a woman, although he soon turned into a disapproving grimace when mentioning that Sakura was spying on him and why she was doing it. Naruto ignored him as best he could. After all, it had been solved the next day, but it ended up causing him a bigger problem that he had barely managed to solve before Kai's return. Flashback scene. She had managed to get Sakura home without any problems, but that didn't stop her older sister from throwing some puyas at her as he followed her up the stairs to her room. It seemed that Sakura was telling the truth about her family not knowing about her problems, as her sister, Rukia, kept asking her what she and her friends had been doing to make her fall asleep from exhaustion. Naruto dodged that little obstacle by either claiming that he was just training nearby when he came across Sakura sleeping behind a tree, so he assumed she might have been playing hide and seek or something similar. Fortunately, she made no further comments about it, and instead took him to Sakura's room, which was both the same and different from what he expected when he imagined her. The walls were sky blue instead of pink, as he had thought, and his room was a little cluttered, with stuffed animals scattered on the floor and drawings, half-drawn ones scattered somewhat haphazardly across the desk. Her bed was quite simple, and she had put it to bed just long enough for the front door to open, and Sakura's mother to announce her return home. Ruki appeared to understand his unwillingness to meet his mother and let him escape through the window of Sakura's room before heading to the entrance of Sakura's room, shouting something inaudible at her mother in response. The next day he got up earlier than usual because he had spent the night in his apartment instead of in the Uchiha residence, mainly to assimilate what was happening between him and Saki. She showered and changed quickly before going to Sakura's house with a specific purpose in mind. Sakura was very predictable in the academy, now that I thought about it better. He always arrived at about the same time, sat in the same place, and ate the same lunch that he brought every day. This meant that, if I was right, I would be leaving the house right now. True to his predictions, he saw the pink-haired girl leave the house with the backpack on her shoulder, saying something inaudible to those inside. She let Sakura walk about 50 meters away before crouching down next to her, which made her jump before she realized who it was, and blush in embarrassment as she tilted her head towards him, speaking softly so that no one on the street. I could hear her. Uzumaki-san. I'm so sorry about yesterday. I shouldn't have followed you in such a creepy way. And then I fell asleep too. About you. He put a hand on her shoulder, making a slight grimace as he saw that she tensed under his grip, remaining silent and tilting her head once more. Sakura, you're fine, I swear. I know how you feel, and that's why I'm here today. She shuddered when he mentioned that he knew how he felt and realized that he obviously thought it was partly his fault, which had happened before he left with Cage. He insisted before she got any angrier, knowing that his offer would hopefully counter that soon. Sakura, I'm here to offer you my friendship, and so that we can start over without the past affecting us, what do you say? He was surprised when she did not immediately accept, but turned her head to him and negotiated her with concern. But Uzumaki-san, if we were friends in the academy, I would make you come down socially. It's not that popular guys want to hang out with. His voice turned into a murmur at this point, and Naruto didn't manage to understand what he was saying exactly. But the idea was quite clear to him. His hand moved from her shoulder to her waist in a gentle motion that made her blush and squeal slightly before she calmed down once more, and settled for looking down demurely, her face still tinged with pink from her embarrassment. Sakura-chan, let's think about what we want, not what those idiots who always talk want, okay? She nodded weakly, blushing at the familiar suffix at the end of her name. Naruto smiled at him, glad to have reconnected with the Sakura he remembered. End of the flashback. Looking back on it now, Naruto realized that maybe it wasn't the best decision, considering it was the first thing Saki saw of him that day. A blushing girl on the arm and a satisfied smile. She had been quite cold to him for the next 3 days, not showing up for training and ignoring his calls to her house to find out what was wrong. It was only when he saw her training as Sasuke at the Uchiha training camp on the 4th day after becoming official friends with Sakura that he realized how much he had messed up. In a fit of rage, Sakura broke his nose and 2 ribs in the fight before yelling at him how much she hated him and storming off, leaving him even more confused from where she lay in the middle of the training ground. Naruto, who never gave up on something as insignificant as broken ribs, doggedly pursued her, while posing as a man to bring her some things to disguise her attempted apology. Saki hadn't gone that far, hiding in the forest while silently crying, something that broke Naruto's heart, even as he wrapped her in a hug that she let herself be drawn into without resistance. They didn't talk about it immediately, they just ate the dango that his shadow had brought him as the start of his peace offering. Only when they were finished, leaning on each other to warm up in the cool autumn afternoon, did Saki ask him, with much hesitation, if he regretted the kiss. It was at that moment that he had a brilliance that far exceeded his usual intelligence, leaning over and kissing her once more, instead of trying to put his feelings into words. There was no doubt in his mind that an attempt at such eloquence would have probably gotten him into even more trouble with Saki. After a few minutes of gentle kissing with only breaks to catch his breath, Naruto pulled away, looking Saki straight in the eyes, while firmly stating that he had not regretted the kiss for a moment. Saki had refused to let go of him for the rest of the night, even after he had clarified to her several times firmly that he wouldn't ignore her now that Sakura was his friend. This was something he was obviously quite concerned about, considering he kept asking about it. The last time was when they were getting ready to sleep at the Uchiha complex. He had not resisted being chosen the place to sleep when Saki started dragging him there. Some battles just weren't worth it. It took until she introduced him to Cage and got the man to agree to train her, before Saki stopped being so dependent and returned to normal. Saki was obviously relieved that he didn't leave her out for whatever reason he could have come up with, considering that she had done as he asked and introduced him to Cage. This, despite the shame she obviously felt for having to prostrate herself before the man and beg for his help before he finally agreed. Although Kai's statement that they would be going on a trip a month after their return almost made me angry. You will be here, especially when Cage firmly informed him that he would not be able to accompany them. Naruto imagined that the elder Sarutobi had been quite difficult to convince Naruto to accompany Cage, without also trying to take the last dacha, especially considering that they were leaving the land of fire on the trip. Saki had tried everything from begging the man, and then the Cage, to trying to bribe Naruto to sneak her out when he left. Luckily, Cage stepped in and talked to her instead of letting Naruto figure it out, as he probably would have relented if she had kept nagging him, and he knew that wouldn't end well for either of them. She finally backed down on 2 conditions. First, Naruto will spend every night with her until he leaves, which had caused the 2 older ninjas to raise their eyebrows, followed by a rather awkward chat from Sarutobi about birds and bees, that he had left Naruto red in the face every time Saki hugged or kissed him for the next few days. His other condition was to make Kureno Bunaga's alias official in Konoha so that he could tour the village without the pressure of the Uchiha clan. Sarutobi agreed to this upon learning about what happened with Sakura and the concern of Naruto that Sakura might start to get suspicious if she decided to investigate the girl, and found out that there were no records of her. Speaking of the girl with pink hair, she was hanging out with Naruto before and during school now, trying hard not to behave the same as before he left with Cage, although she knew that sometimes that still it affected their actions. The rest of the class was very suspicious of the bond between them, and several of the most popular girls had tried to break it, convincing Naruto that Sakura was not worth his time and that he should spend time with them. Naruto calmly and serenely dismissed them, stating that he didn't have to make time for girls who just wanted to be his friends, because someone else had already done it. This made Sakura burst into tears and hugged him tightly, promising that she would never let him regret his decision. She had started helping him with the homework the academy had assigned for the day, and he was enormously surprised by the amount of knowledge that the girl had inside her head, able to remember obscure facts and figures that she definitely could not remember to have mentioned in class at any time. With the help of Sakura Isaki, his work began to improve, going from a low note to a low one. In a few weeks, he had tried to convince Sakura repeatedly that she didn't need to help him with his chores because he was her friend. But Sakura just shrugged her shoulders and said that she liked spending time with him, and that if helping him was a way to spend more time with him, she didn't mind doing it. With that and Cage introducing him to several new poses and techniques during the torture intended to be training, Naruto felt confident that even with the time he would spend away from Konoha, he would do more than well on the excursion, which would take place after the Christmas holidays. He got out of his thoughts to concentrate on the training session again. After looking at Saki, who nodded, Naruto attacked again, trying to surprise Cage by summoning 2 shadows to the man's left to support him, while Saki positioned herself on his right. He would be shot down this time, he was sure. Time jump. They failed miserably. The older man did not even react to the increased number of his opponents. Cage was obviously holding back enough to allow them to practice their fight against him instead of going all out and crushing them, without him learning anything from the fight. That didn't mean he was kind to them, Naruto thought as he carefully felt the bandages on his chest, wincing as he felt the movement in his bruised ribs. He was by the front door with Cage, about to embark on his month-long journey. The trip had 2 purposes. First, to visit Grass one more time for the censor girl. This was to see if Naruto was luckier than Kei talking to her about his heritage. The second part was to sneak into the slave auction where the girl Oli would be sold. Of course they hadn't mentioned that to Sarutobi when getting his permission to leave. It was going to be nothing more than a simple hostage rescue mission, so he didn't have much to worry about. Ignoring the shiver that ran down his spine at the thought of that last thought, he concentrated on Sakura, who was crying in front of him, a matter that he knew would require his full attention sooner rather than later. Sakura-chan, I'm not going to be away for more than a couple of weeks, okay? So it won't even be the school holidays. I'll be back before you know I'm really gone. Somehow, that didn't help, and she hugged him tightly while still crying on his shoulder, choking out his words. But he could still understand them. "That's what I thought last time, and you were gone for 2 years. Promise me you'll be back before the end of next week, Naruto, please." Sighing defeated, he put an arm around her while speaking in an obedient tone. "I promise to be back by the end of next Friday. If not, Sakura-chan might have all day to force me to do whatever she wants, as long as it's legal." Surprisingly, it was the second time today that he had made that promise. Saki had wrung the same promise from him, but 2 hours earlier. This was when he said goodbye in private at the Uchiha resort, as Saki could not go. To fire him in person, without people wondering who he was. However, the effect of the promise was exactly the same on both girls. The tears slowly dried up before Sakura looked at him with a hopeful expression. "Are you really serious about that?" Like Hinsaki, Naruto is not. She couldn't help but wonder if he meant the promise of her return, or the promise that one day he would do whatever she wanted if she didn't. Not that it mattered, since he meant the first promise seriously, so he wouldn't have to worry about the second one. "Of course I do, Sakura-chan. Like I said, I'll be back before you know it." Any other words were interrupted when Sakura leaned in mid-sentence and kissed him on the cheek. Part of her lips met his in a strange semi-heavy that left him stuttering while Sakura blushed for what she had done, and ran out before he could react to the kiss. He snapped out of his confused thoughts when Cage chuckled behind his back. The older man grabbed him by the shoulder and turned him around so that they could walk like shadows towards the first point that Cage had chosen on the way to the grass region. While Cage was practicing the seal sequence for the technique, Naruto turned his head to the inside of Konoha, hoping that Saki hadn't been watching Sakura kiss him. Otherwise, everything would end badly for both of them. Character change, Sakura Aruno. Leaning against the wall of the side alley she had run into after her stupid action with Naruto at the door, Sakura couldn't be more mortified for what he had just done. He admitted that, over the past 3 weeks, his feelings for the blonde guy had quickly turned into a kind of infatuation, and his confidence and willingness to be his friend, despite the actions of others. Members of the class contributed greatly to the feelings that even now tormented her. And now she had probably ruined everything by kissing him. When he came back, he would probably try to distance himself. She knew that while he had been fine with being her friend again despite his past, he would not accept a relationship with her if he started behaving just like when they met. Naruto had noticed her since the first day he met her, and even though they were in different classes, he was always going to hang out with her and her friends. She honestly admitted that she loved that an older guy was obsessed with her, and she knew that he had started taking advantage of it, forcing him to do things for her and her friends that she didn't bother to do herself. The first time he had really teased her with his affection was after Sasuke rejected her for the first time, and in a fit of anger, she had knocked him down with a right hand. Although he felt much better after the punch, he assumed it would be the last time he would see him. After all, it wasn't as if many people saw violence as something attractive. Certainly, that would be the last time she would see him for 2 years, and with the slow loss of her group of friends. That had been the incident Sakura remembered with the most self-deprecation, thinking that she had been the one who made him leave without even saying goodbye. Even when he finally returned and was assigned to his class, he avoided her, except in that class, when she attacked him with a crib and, among other things. Suddenly, a cold and familiar voice behind her interrupted her depressive thoughts, causing Sakura to startle and quickly turn around. Looking up only made her turn even paler as she came face to face with Kage, the girl Naruto had introduced her to as his teacher's daughter-in-law, a girl who was very scary in general. "You do realize it was my boyfriend you just kissed, right? Sakura-chan, maybe you want to tell me something about you and him." The cold look did nothing to calm Sakura's nerves, who quickly bowed her head, hoping that a sincere apology would avoid the inevitable beating that the other girl would end up giving her for her unintentional indiscretion. "Karasama, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that Naruto-kun was kidnapped. I didn't mean to dishonor you or him, I swear." She kept her head down, hoping that if the girl decided to attack her, it wouldn't be in the face or the neck. Any other injury would be easy to hide from his family, who he really didn't want to find out about his actions that day. He saw Carrie's feet coming closer and couldn't help but close his eyes tightly as he stopped right in front of her. Then a small but calloused hand gently touched her cheek and lifted her up, leaving her upright. Sakura didn't resist in case it made her even more angry. This time, when Carrie spoke, her tone was softer and kinder. "Sakura-chan, open your eyes, please. I won't beat you up for an unintentional mistake. I'm angry about what happened, but this time I'm willing to forget about it." Opening her eyes slowly, she saw that the look had faded, replaced by a slight frown. Carrie's hand was still gently holding Sakura's chin as she stared into her eyes for a moment longer before sighing and releasing her. Returning her hand to the girl's hip. "Sakura-chan, how long has it been since you liked Naruto-kun like this? From what he told me about you before going to training, there was no sign that you liked me." Sakura swallowed deeply as she realized that she couldn't escape from this conversation without confessing the truth one way or another. Gathering his courage, he spoke quickly to try to get it off his chest. "I guess I should start from the beginning, Kara-sama. It started the day I met you. This was definitely going to be the most awkward conversation of his life, including the one where Rukia decided to explain the birds and the bees to him in exquisite detail." Time jump. Character: Naruto Uzumaki. Cursing his own stupid claim that nothing could go wrong at the beginning of the trip, Naruto tensed slightly when another rogue ninja jumped between the branches of the tree below him, obviously looking for him and the girl who he was carrying on his back. The trip to the land of grass had passed without incident, and Kage quickly determined that the censor girl was still too protected to risk Naruto trying to talk to her.